5 days after my daughter's funeral, my son-in-law blocked the door, refusing to let me see my granddaughter, a cold smile on his face. She's mine. You're nothing but excess leave before I erase you from her life completely. 3 days later in the pouring rain, he stared straight at me with contempt. You have no rights. I have money. I have the law, and I have plenty of ways to make you disappear like you never existed. I stood frozen, but the small trembling hand behind the glass was still reaching out to me. A few days later, I received a letter the truth inside left me in shock. This story is about love loss and a father's fight to protect what matters most. Before we begin, drop a comment below. Have you ever had to fight for someone you love against impossible odds? I read every word you share. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling, but the heart of it, the message about love and justice, is what truly matters. The door slammed 6 inches from my face, and through the narrow window, I watched my 3-year-old granddaughter press her small hand against the glass. 5 days after we buried my daughter, I stood on the front steps of the Laurelhurst house I had helped Leora buy, staring at that closed door. At 60 years old, I had spent 2 decades volunteering at the NE Portland Women's Shelter, living on an $800 monthly stipend, and the satisfaction of helping others rebuild their lives. I'd counseled hundreds of grieving families. I thought I understood loss. I didn't understand this. She just lost her mother, I'd said through the door moments before it slammed. She needs family. She has family, me. You can leave now? Dashiell Prescott, 38, had built his Pearl District real estate empire on charm and calculated ruthlessness that only my daughter had seen behind closed doors. Standing there in his tailored suit, blocking me from Nova with the casual authority of ownership, he looked every inch the grieving widower, protecting his daughter from unnecessary stress. But Nova's eyes told a different story. Through the window, her small face was pale, her mouth open in a silent cry. She knew me. She'd spent weekends at my apartment, laughing at my terrible pancakes falling asleep on my shoulder during movie nights. Now, she watched me leave, like she was watching the last piece of her mother disappear. You're not allowed near her anymore. Harlan, Dashiell had said, his voice level and cold. I'm her father. I decide who she sees. I'd expected shock maybe, grief, the normal chaos of a man who'd lost his wife 5 days ago. What I got was clinical precision, a decision already made, rehearsed, delivered without hesitation. How does a father turn away the grandfather of a child who just lost her mother? I walked back to my truck with that question burning in my chest. The July afternoon was hot, but I felt cold. Nova's hand remained pressed against the glass until I turned the corner. I could still see it in my mind, small fingers spread wide, like she was trying to reach through the barrier between us. 5 days earlier, at 2:14 in the morning, my phone had rung with the sound that changes everything. Mr. Rawlings, there's been an accident on the Fremont Bridge. Your daughter, I'm very sorry. The Portland police officer's voice had been professionally gentle trained in delivering impossible news. I'd driven to OHSU Hospital in a fog, my hands shaking on the wheel, praying they had made a mistake, praying Leora was hurt but alive, praying for anything except the truth. The emergency room smelled like disinfectant and despair. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright, too sterile for the worst moment of my life. A nurse led me through double doors to a small room where they keep the families of the dead away from the living, contained in their grief. Dashiell was already there. That should have been my first clue. He stood when I entered, his face composed in an expression of perfect devastation. "Harlan!" he said, and his voice broke on my name. It was raining. She must have lost control. The bridge was slick. My daughter, Leora, 35, had been a compliance lawyer at one of Portland's top audit firms before the accident took her from us. She'd driven that bridge 1,000 times. Rain had never stopped her before. "Where's Nova?" I asked. With the nanny I didn't want her to see, he gestured helplessly at the hospital around us. "She's too young to understand." We sat in that small room for 2 hours, while doctors and police officers cycled through with paperwork and condolences. Dashiell answered every question with calm precision. Yes, she'd been working late. Yes, she'd called to say she was on her way home. No, she hadn't sounded distressed, just tired. "What was she wearing?" the police officer asked, taking notes. "Black suit," Dashiell said without hesitation. "The Armani one. White blouse, pearl earrings I gave her for our anniversary." I'd seen manufactured emotion before. 20 years at the shelter taught me the difference between real tears and performance. Real grief is messy. It forgets details. It can't remember what someone was wearing because the brain is too busy trying to process the impossible fact that they're gone. Dashiell remembered everything. And he was wearing a different suit than he had worn to dinner 3 days earlier when Leora had brought Nova to my apartment. That night, Dashiell had worn navy blue. Now, at 4 in the morning in a hospital emergency room, he wore charcoal gray, fresh, pressed, like he'd had time to change, like he'd been waiting. "Did you see her tonight?" I asked him. "Before the accident." "No," he said. "I was home with Nova. She called around 9 to say she was leaving the office." His eyes didn't waver. His hands didn't shake. 5 hours after his wife died, Dashiell Prescott had the composure of a man giving a business presentation. The police ruled it an accident, single-car crash, wet roads, possible hydroplaning. They found her briefcase in the passenger seat papers scattered across the floorboards. Her phone showed the call to Dashiell at 9:03 p.m. Everything lined up with his story. Everything except the feeling in my gut that screamed that something was wrong. When they finally let us leave, Dashiell walked me to my truck in the parking garage. The sky was starting to lighten with dawn. Portland in July smells like roses and river water. That morning, it smelled like loss. "Thank you for coming," he said, and he hugged me. His arms went around my shoulders. His tears fell against my neck, and those tears felt colder than the hospital air conditioning. I didn't know then what I know now. I didn't know my daughter didn't die in an accident. I didn't know that 5 days later, I'd be banned from seeing my granddaughter. I didn't know that the man crying on my shoulder had already started planning how to erase me from Nova's life. I just knew that something about his grief felt wrong. The funeral was 3 days away, and I still believed the police report. The funeral didn't answer my questions about Dashiell's too-perfect grief. It only created new ones. 3 days after we buried my daughter, her 3-year-old asked me the question I couldn't answer. "Grandpa, when is Mommy coming home? She's been gone a long time." Nova sat on the cream-colored sofa in the Laurelhurst house living room, clutching the brown teddy bear Leora had given her for her 2nd birthday. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, making dust motes dance in the air. Everything in that house was expensive and tasteful and cold, like Dashiell had hired someone to create the appearance of warmth without understanding what it actually felt like. I knelt in front of her, my knees protesting against the hardwood floor. How do you explain death to a child who still believes in magic? "Sweetheart," I started then stopped. My throat closed around the words. "Your mommy, she's not coming back. She's in heaven now. Can we visit her there?" "No, honey, we can't." "Why not?" "Because heaven doesn't have visiting hours. Because I don't even know if I believe in heaven anymore. Because your mother died on a bridge and your father's grief feels like performance art, and I can't shake the feeling that something is terribly, horribly wrong." "Because that's not how it works," I said instead. Nova's small fingers gripped the teddy bear tighter. I noticed then that her palms had small red crescents where her nails had pressed into the skin. She'd been holding that bear so hard for so long that she'd left marks. "Nova, sweetie, time for your nap. Say goodbye to Grandpa." Dashiell's voice came from the doorway. I hadn't heard him approach. When I turned, he stood there in dark slacks and a white shirt, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread on elegant mourning. Nova's reaction hit me like a punch to the chest. She pulled back, not obviously, not dramatically, just a small flinch, her shoulders drawing and her body going rigid. The way she pulled away from him when he reached for her wasn't grief. It was fear. I'd spent 20 years helping women escape men who made their children cower like that. I knew the signs, the instinctive retreat, the way Nova's eyes tracked Dashiell's hands, the barely perceptible tension in her small frame, like she was preparing to absorb a blow. "She's fine here with me," I said, keeping my voice calm. "We're just talking." "She needs routine," Dashiell said, and his tone allowed no argument. "Stability." The counselor was very clear about that. "What counselor?" When had he taken her to a counselor? It had been 3 days. "Hey, come on, Nova," he said, extending his hand. She went to him because she had no choice, because he was her father, and she was 3 years old, and children obey even when they're afraid. But I watched her small hand disappear into his, and I saw her shoulders hunch, and I knew something was very wrong in this house. Dashiell left the room with Nova, and I stood there in that expensive living room, surrounded by leather-bound books that had never been read and art that had been purchased for tax deductions. and I felt the first stirrings of something deeper than suspicion: rage. 2 days later, Dashiell made his position clear. "I've changed the locks," he said when I arrived at the house on a gray Friday morning. Rain drizzled down, making the sidewalk slick and dark. He stood in the doorway, blocking my entrance like he'd blocked it before. "The nanny you recommended is gone. Nova doesn't need confusion right now. She needs stability." "I'm her grandfather," I said, and I heard my voice shake with anger I couldn't quite control. "She needs family who loves her. She has a father who will provide everything she needs. You can leave your number. I'll call if necessary. You have to understand, I had no legal standing, no rights, nothing but an old man's instinct screaming that something was wrong." Leora hadn't left a will designating guardianship. She'd been 35 and healthy, and thought she had decades to worry about things like that. Oregon law gave all parental rights to the surviving parent. Dashiell didn't need my permission for anything, and he knew it. "You can't just cut me out of her life," I said. "She's grieving. She needs what I decide she needs." His voice was ice. "I'm her legal guardian. I have full custody. You have nothing. I'll call child services and tell them that I'm providing my daughter with a stable home environment during a difficult time, that I'm following professional advice about limiting disruptions. Please, Harlan, make the call. I have 3 lawyers on retainer who will bury any complaint you file." The rain was getting heavier. Water dripped from the eaves of the house, creating small rivers in the flower beds Leora had planted. She'd loved gardening. She'd gotten dirt under her fingernails and laughed when the roses refused to bloom. Now her roses were blooming, and she'd never see them. "Just let me say goodbye to her," I said. "She's napping. Then I'll wait." "No, you'll leave, now." I stood there on his doorstep, 60 years old and powerless, and I wanted to hit him. I wanted to force my way past him and take Nova and run. I wanted to do something, anything, to wipe that calm superiority off his face. But I couldn't, because he was right. He had all the power, and I had none. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw her. Nova, standing at the second-floor window, her small hand pressed against the glass. The same gesture I'd seen 5 days from now, when Dashiell would slam the door in my face. The same silent goodbye. She was watching me leave, again. I stood on that rain-soaked sidewalk, water seeping through my jacket, and felt more powerless than I'd ever felt in 60 years. My daughter was dead. My granddaughter was trapped with a man who made her cower, and I had no legal right to do anything about it. I didn't know that in 6 days a package would arrive that would change everything, my daughter's final gift to me from beyond the grave. But first I had to survive 6 days of not knowing if Nova was safe. 6 days of waiting felt like drowning in slow motion. The first thing I learned about grief is that it doesn't stop the world. You still have to show up, go through the motions, pretend the days have meaning. So, on the 6th morning after my daughter's death, I drove to the NE Portland Women's Shelter, like I had every weekday for the past 20 years. The building smelled like coffee and industrial cleaner. Women moved through the common areas with the particular wariness of people who'd learned not to trust good things. I knew most of their stories, knew which ones flinched at raised voices, knew which ones were planning to go back to the men who'd hurt them, because leaving felt more dangerous than staying. For 2 decades, this work had given me purpose. Now, it felt like going through the motions of someone else's life. "Harlan, you don't have to be here," Celeste Whitaker said, when she found me in the small records room filing intake forms with mechanical precision. Celeste, 58, had worked alongside me at the shelter for 15 years, and her network at Oregon DHS ran deeper than anyone knew. "Take time. I need to be useful," I said, not looking up from the files. "Sitting home, I can't sit home." She squeezed my shoulder and left me alone with the paperwork. The filing system didn't care that my daughter was dead. The forms still needed organizing. The women still needed advocates. The world kept turning whether I was ready or not. On the 8th day, Paloma Gallagher found me drinking bad coffee in the break room, staring at the wall. "You look like hell," she said, pouring herself a cup and sitting across from me at the scarred wooden table. Paloma, 35, had rebuilt her life after I helped her escape an abusive marriage 3 years earlier, and she hadn't forgotten. She worked as a paralegal, now supported her 2 kids, and volunteered at the shelter twice a week to help other women find the courage she'd found. "Thanks," I said. "I heard about your daughter. I'm so sorry." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "And I heard about your granddaughter. I looked up at that. How? This is Portland. The shelter network talks. Her dark eyes were kind but direct. You're cut off from her. Her father has full custody. He changed the locks, fired the nanny. I have no legal right to see her. That's not right. Legal and right aren't the same thing. I took a drink of coffee that had gone cold. I spent 20 years helping women escape men like him, and I can't even visit my own granddaughter trapped with one. Paloma reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, certain. You saved me once, Harlan. I'm here when you need me. I mean it. I didn't know then how much I'd need that promise. How Paloma's connections would become the thread that unraveled everything. But some part of me recognized the gift she was offering, the same gift I'd given her 3 years ago, when I'd helped her disappear in the middle of the night with her children and nothing else. Solidarity, the kind that doesn't ask questions first. Yep, thank you, I said. She squeezed my hand once more and left me to my cold coffee and filing. The package arrived on the 10th evening. I was home in my small apartment reheating soup. I had no appetite for it when the UPS truck pulled up outside. The driver handed me a padded envelope, had me sign the electronic pad, and drove away without knowing he'd just delivered a message from the dead. The return address made my hands shake. Leora Prescott, 3847NE, Laurelhurst Drive. My daughter dead 10 days, had just sent me mail. I carried the package to my kitchen table with the care you'd give a bomb. The overhead light buzzed, casting harsh shadows across the brown paper. My name and address were printed in a generic shipping label, but there was something else, a small card tucked under the tape. Vanishing mail. Your message, your schedule. If you don't check in, we deliver. My fingers were clumsy as I tore open the envelope. Inside a USB drive in a plastic case and a letter written on yellow legal pad paper in Leora's distinctive handwriting. The same precise script she'd used since law school. The same way she'd made grocery lists and birthday cards and notes that said, "Love you, Dad," on my refrigerator. She'd written this while she was alive, while she still drew breath and made plans and worried about the future. The letter began, "Dad, if you're reading this, I've been unable to log in for 30 days. My husband is not who you think he is." The words blurred. I blinked hard, forced myself to focus. I've spent the last 8 months documenting his business dealings. The real estate empire is a front for money laundering. I have evidence bank statements, shell company registrations, communications with his partners. It's all on the encrypted USB drive. The password is Nova's birthday, December 15th, 2020. I plan to take this to the FBI next month. I plan to file for divorce, get Nova to safety, and disappear before he knew what was happening. I had everything ready. A trust fund. He doesn't know about a lawyer. He's never met an escape plan. But if you're reading this, something went wrong. If you're reading this, he figured out what I was doing. I need you to... I read that first paragraph 3 times, my brain struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. She knew. Leora knew Daschle was dangerous. She'd been investigating him for 8 months. She'd prepared evidence. She'd made plans. She'd set up this letter as insurance programmed to send if she couldn't cancel it. My daughter had anticipated her own murder and prepared posthumous protection for me. I held the letter in trembling hands, trying to read the next paragraph when my doorbell rang. The sound cut through the kitchen like a knife. I looked at the clock, 8:47 p.m. I never got visitors this late. The package had arrived less than 10 minutes ago. Someone knew. It was just the UPS driver wanting a signature confirmation. I scrawled my name on his electronic pad with shaking hands, closed the door, and returned to my daughter's voice from beyond the grave. The kitchen light cast a yellow circle on the table where Leora's letter waited. Outside, Portland's summer night had gone dark and quiet. Inside, I was about to learn how my daughter had spent the last 8 months of her life. I sat down under that single lamp and read, "Dad, if you're reading this, I've been unable to log in for 30 days. My husband is not who you think he is. I discovered the first shell company by accident, a property transfer in the Pearl District that made no financial sense. The buyer paid triple market value for a building that needed foundation work. When I ran the LLC registration, it traced back to Daschle through 3 layers of corporate structure. 8 months later, I've traced 12 companies. They're moving money through real estate transactions, buying properties at inflated prices, with dirty money, selling them at a loss to clean funds. I estimate $5 million annually flowing through this network. I documented everything: bank statements, property records, communications with his partners, shell company registrations. It's all on the encrypted USB. The password is something only you and I would know. Think about the day everything changed. I'm filing for divorce and full custody next month. I have everything ready because a trust fund he doesn't know about a lawyer in Seattle. He's never met an apartment in Eugene. I'll take Nova and disappear while he's at his conference in San Francisco. By the time he realizes we're gone, we'll be protected by restraining orders and federal investigators. But Dad, if something happens to me before, then if I die in an accident or suddenly get sick or disappear, don't believe it. Look at the USB, take it to the FBI, protect Nova. He's dangerous in ways I didn't understand until it was too late. He's not violent at home, at least not physically, not to me, but I've seen what he does to people who cross him in business. And if he finds out I know about the money, I'm scared. But I'm more scared of what happens to Nova if I do nothing. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. I thought I could handle this alone. Leora. I read the letter 3 times. My daughter had lived with that fear for 8 months, smiling at breakfast, kissing her daughter goodnight, sleeping beside the man who would kill her if he knew what she'd discovered. She'd moved through her days with an escape plan forming in her mind, documenting evidence, preparing to run. And she'd almost made it. The conference in San Francisco. It must have been soon. She must have been days or weeks from pulling the trigger on her plan when Dashiell figured it out. When he decided a rainy night on the Fremont Bridge was the perfect place for an accident. Don't believe it, she'd written. I didn't, not anymore. I looked at the USB drive sitting on my kitchen table. Everything she'd risked her life to gather. Everything I needed to prove Dashiell had murdered my daughter. All of it locked behind a password I didn't know. Sleep was impossible. I sat at my corner desk with my old laptop as Portland's night deepened into the small hours of morning. Rain started around midnight, tapping against the window. I inserted the USB drive and the screen prompted, "Enter password." The day everything changed. I tried Nova's birthday, 1st December 15th, 2020. The day my granddaughter was born, the day Leora became a mother. Wrong. Leora's birthday, April 17th, 1988. Wrong. Our old address from when she was growing up, 1432. Wrong. Her college graduation, May 24th, 2010. Wrong. Her wedding anniversary. No, she wouldn't use that. Not for something this important. The day her mother died, August 3rd, 2005. Wrong. The day I started at the shelter, June 15th, 2003. Wrong. Her law school graduation, May 19th, 2013. Wrong. The screen changed incorrect password. 7 of 10 attempts used. Device will erase after 10 failed attempts. 7 tries, 3 chances left. My hands were shaking. Rain drummed harder against the window. The laptop screen glowed blue in the dark apartment, waiting for me to destroy the last evidence my daughter had left behind. You ever hold something in your hands that could change everything and realize you're too old, too alone, too far from that world to know what to do with it? I'd spent 20 years helping women fill out restraining orders and navigate the Oregon court system. I knew which judges were sympathetic and which bureaucrats actually answered their phones. I could connect someone with emergency housing or a pro bono lawyer or a safe place to sleep. But I didn't know how to crack encryption. I didn't know what "the day everything changed" meant in my daughter's private language. I didn't know if I had 3 guesses or 3 seconds before I made a mistake that would erase her final gift to me. The clock on my laptop read 6:17 a.m. I'd been staring at that password prompt for hours, afraid to move, afraid to try again, afraid to lose the only proof that Dashiell Prescott had murdered his wife. I thought about the letter. The day everything changed. Not a birthday, not an anniversary, a day that meant something to both of us. The day she told me she was pregnant with Nova. The day she introduced me to Dashiell. The day she graduated from law school, and I cried because her mother should have been there to see it. I typed March 22nd, 2020, the day she first told me she was afraid of her husband. Wrong. The screen updated incorrect password. 8 of 10 attempts used. 2 chances left. I closed the laptop. My hands were trembling so badly I knocked over my cold coffee. Brown liquid spread across the desk, soaking into old bills and shelter intake forms. I didn't move to clean it up. 2 more guesses and everything Leora had died to protect would vanish. Bank statements, property records, communications with criminals, shell company registrations, all of it gone because her father was too stupid to solve a password puzzle his dead daughter had left him. I stared at the USB drive lying next to my closed laptop. 3 chances left before my daughter's evidence erased itself forever. If I kept going alone, I'd lose everything she'd died to give me. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. I needed proof before I asked anyone to risk themselves. 3 days after the package arrived, I went looking for it. I crouched behind the hedge at 384 7NE Laurelhurst. Drive my daughter's house, my son-in-law's fortress, waiting for proof I already knew was true. July evening in Portland smelled like cut grass and barbecue smoke from neighboring yards. Families were eating dinner, watching television, living normal lives where murder was something that happened to other people. I pressed myself against the laurel bushes that lined Dashiell's property, feeling ridiculous and desperate, and absolutely certain I was doing the right thing. The second-floor window was open, Dashiell's home office where Leora used to do her legal work late at night while he traveled. I could see him pacing inside, phone to his ear, backlit by the warm glow of expensive lamps. His voice carried clearly through the summer air. "My wife's matter is handled," he said, and my blood turned to ice. The police bought the accident story completely. No investigation, no questions. Clean. A pause while whoever was on the other end responded. "We're safe for a few years," Dashiell continued, still pacing. "Keep the transfers moving through the old channel, same company, same schedule. She won't be a problem for us anymore. She won't be a problem, my daughter. The woman who'd brought this man coffee in bed every morning. The mother of his child. The lawyer who'd discovered his crimes and died trying to escape them. A problem, handled, clean." I stayed behind that hedge until he ended the call and walked away from the window. Then I stayed longer, making sure he wouldn't return. My knees ached from crouching. My hands had left dirt stains on my jeans from gripping the ground to keep myself from standing up and throwing a rock through his window. When he said she wouldn't be a problem anymore, I knew my daughter was right about everything, and I was right to come here tonight. But I was also right about something else. I couldn't fight this alone. I drove to Selwood through quiet streets, Portland's evening traffic thinning out as the hour pushed toward midnight. Celeste's house was a small craftsman with a front porch and flower boxes she tended herself. In 15 years of working together at the shelter, I'd never shown up unannounced. We had boundaries, professional respect, but it was 11 p.m. on a Thursday night, and I was about to break all the rules. The porch light came on before I finished climbing the steps. Celeste opened the door in a bathrobe and slippers her gray hair loose around her shoulders instead of the tight bun she wore at work. "Harlan," she said, and her face showed no surprise, like she'd been expecting me, like she'd known this moment was coming since the day my daughter died. "Come in." Her living room smelled like lavender candles and old books. She gestured me to the couch and sat in the armchair across from me, waiting. "Celeste, I'm sorry to come this late, but I need help. I can't do this alone." "Tell me everything," she said. "Start from the package." So I did. The vanishing mail delivery. Leora's letter describing 8 months of secret investigation. The money laundering network moving millions through shell real estate companies. The encrypted USB couldn't unlock. And tonight, Dashiell's phone call, his casual admission that his wife's murder was handled business. Celeste listened without interrupting. Her face showed no shock, no disbelief. She'd worked with abuse survivors for 2 decades. Nothing surprised her anymore. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to her kitchen counter and picked up her phone. "I'm calling the others," she said. "We meet tomorrow at 8. This is our fight now, Harlan." "The others?" "You spend 20 years building something, helping people, making connections, showing up never thinking you'll be the one who needs saving." She dialed a number, held the phone to her ear. "Hugh first. He'll want to know about this." "Hugh?" "Hugh Thornton, investigative journalist. He covered the shelter fundraiser last year, remember? Did that whole piece on domestic violence in Portland's wealthy neighborhoods?" I remembered. The article had been scathing and precise, naming patterns without naming names, pressuring the mayor's office into funding increases. "Hugh," Celeste said into the phone. "I know it's late. I need you at my house tomorrow, 8 a.m. Bring your laptop and your skepticism. We have a murder to prove." She hung up and dialed again. "Ruth Sinclair, family law attorney, sits on the bench part-time in Multnomah County. She owes me about 6 favors." Another call. "Ruth, it's Celeste Whitaker. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. On my house. Bring your knowledge of custody law and whatever pull you have left at the courthouse." 2 more calls. Virgil Frost, a detective she'd worked with on cases over the years. Wade Spencer, my best friend from the shelter's early days. a social worker who knew the system's loopholes better than anyone. 4 calls, 4 people willing to drop everything and show up at dawn because Celeste Whitaker said it mattered. "They'll come," she said, setting down the phone. "They always do. I don't have money to pay." "This isn't about money." She sat back down, and her eyes were fierce in the lamplight. "You've helped half the women in this city find safety. You've connected families to housing. You've testified in court for people who had no one else. You think we forgot." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed around something too big for words. She leaned forward, took my hand, the way Paloma had taken it at the shelter. "You've given 20 years to this community, Harlan. It's time the community gives back to you." The clock on her mantel read 11:47 p.m. In 8 hours, my kitchen table would transform into a war room. In 8 hours, I wouldn't be a grieving father trying to solve an impossible puzzle alone. In 8 hours, I'd have an army. "Yes, thank you," I managed to say. "Don't thank me yet," Celeste said. "We haven't won, but we're going to." I believed her. By morning, I wouldn't be alone anymore. They arrived before dawn, just like Celeste promised. 5 coffee mugs circled my kitchen table. At 8 a.m., mine Celeste's, and 3 people I hadn't seen in months who'd dropped everything when she called. Hugh Thornton, 62, had spent 4 decades at the Oregonian exposing corruption, and he owed me a favor from a story I'd helped him crack years ago. He sat with a laptop already open, his gray beard neatly trimmed eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Ruth Sinclair, 68, had retired from the family court bench 3 years earlier, but her legal mind remained sharper than lawyers half her age. She'd brought a leather briefcase and the kind of focused calm that came from presiding over 1,000 impossible cases. Virgil Frost, 64, had walked the beat in Ney, Portland for 30 years before retiring, and he still had friends throughout the department. He looked like he'd stepped out of an old detective movie solid, weathered with hands that had seen their share of violence and paperwork. Leora's letter sat in the center of the table, the encrypted USB drive beside it, my daughter's evidence still locked behind a password I couldn't solve. "Let's be clear about what we're facing," Ruth said, pulling a yellow legal pad from her briefcase. 3 fronts, criminal prove, it was murder, not an accident, financial, expose the laundering network and connect it to motive, custody, protect Nova from a killer father. We move on all 3 simultaneously. "If we can't unlock that USB," I started. "Then we build the case without it," Ruth interrupted. "The USB is evidence, but it's not the only evidence." Virgil pulled the police accident report from his folder. "I'll start here. If there's evidence of foul play in the original investigation, I'll find it. I know the people who wrote this report. I know what they look for and what they miss." Hugh typed something into his laptop. "And I'll dig into these shell companies your daughter mentioned. Real estate transactions are public record. If he's moving millions annually, there's a paper trail." "What about custody?" I asked. "Daschle has complete legal control." "For now," Ruth said. "But if we prove he's a murderer, that changes. And even before that, if we can demonstrate he's under federal investigation for money laundering, I know judges who will issue emergency protective orders." Celeste had been quiet, letting the professionals outline the strategy. Now she spoke. "We need to move fast. If Leora died for knowing too much, you're the next target. All of you." The words settled over the table like a cold fog. For the first time since Leora died, I wasn't alone. I had an investigative journalist, a legal strategist, a forensic expert, and a community organizer fighting beside me. But Celeste was right. We weren't just investigating a murderer. We were investigating a man with money connections and a demonstrated willingness to kill. "Oh, then we don't give him time to react," Virgil said. "I'll have the accident report analyzed by tomorrow." He was wrong. He had it analyzed by that afternoon. Virgil's home office in Milwaukee smelled like old coffee and gun oil. The walls were covered with photographs from his 3 decades on the forced crime scenes, community events, retirement parties. He'd been a good cop, the kind who remembered that behind every case file was a real person whose life had been torn apart. Now he sat across from me at his cluttered desk, the accident report spread between us, and his jaw was tight with the kind of anger that came from seeing something wrong and knowing exactly what it meant. 3 red flags, he said, pointing to highlighted sections. First, no skid marks. That means she never hit the brakes. Either she was unconscious or someone rammed her before she could react. The words on the page blurred. No skid marks, no attempt to brake. My daughter had been rammed into that guardrail like it was just another business transaction. Second, Virgil continued. Speed at impact was estimated at 55 miles per hour. The Fremont Bridge has a 35-mile-per-hour limit. If she was driving that fast, why? Was she fleeing someone? Or being chased, I said. Or being chased. He agreed. Or third, the file was closed in 48 hours. That's impossibly fast for a vehicular fatality, especially one involving potential DUI or mechanical failure. Someone wanted this buried. He leaned back in his chair, and his eyes had the sharp focus of a man who just solved a puzzle he didn't want to solve. My friend, your daughter, didn't lose control. Someone hit her. This was murder. I'd known it since I read her letter, since I heard Dashiell's phone call. But hearing Virgil say it, hearing a 30-year veteran of the Portland Police Department confirm that the evidence proved murder made it real in a way nothing else had. Can you prove it in court? I asked. Not yet. The original investigation didn't look for a second vehicle. No paint transfer analysis, no witness canvassing beyond the immediate scene. But these red flags, they're enough to reopen the case, especially if we can find the vehicle that hit her. How do we do that? We find out who Dashiell knows with access to heavy vehicles. Construction companies, moving services, anything that could survive a high-speed collision without disabling damage. He closed the file. Hugh's already digging into the business connections. If there's a name, I glanced out his office window. A black SUV was parked 50 yards down the street, engine, running tinted windows reflecting the afternoon light. How long has that been there? I asked. Virgil followed my gaze. His expression didn't change, but his hand moved instinctively toward where his service weapon used to be 20 years ago. Wasn't there when you arrived? He said quietly. We watched the SUV for 30 seconds. It didn't move, didn't park, just sat there with the engine running, watching us. We're not just investigating him, I said. He's watching us back. The black SUV circled Virgil's block twice and disappeared, but it left us with a new urgency. We needed to move faster than whoever was watching could report back. 2 days later, we had our answer about Dashiell, and it wasn't the one I'd hoped for. Ruth's temporary office at Lewis and Clark Law School smelled like old law books and furniture polish. She'd maintained an adjunct position after retiring from the bench, keeping one wood-paneled room with a view of the Willamette River. Hugh sat across from her desk laptop, open scrolling through something that made his expression darker with each page. Portland Business Coalition Charity Gala, he said, turning the screen toward us. July 15th, the night Leora died. I leaned forward. The website showed photographs of Portland's elite in evening wear, champagne glasses, raised smiling for cameras that captured their generosity. And there, center stage in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, was Dashiell Prescott. He gave the keynote on affordable housing, Hugh said, and the irony in his voice was sharp enough to cut. 9:15 to 9:30 p.m. The speech is archived. You can watch the whole thing. And the crash? Ruth asked. 9:47 p.m. on the Fremont Bridge. Hugh pulled up the police report timeline. He has 100 witnesses placing him downtown in the Pearl District, while Leora died 3 miles away. The photograph on the screen showed Dashiell mid-speech, one hand raised in emphasis, the other gripping the podium. Behind him, a banner read, "Building Community Together." On the timestamp in the corner, 9:23 p.m., he'd stood on that stage talking about affordable housing, while someone he hired rammed my daughter into a bridge railing, and 100 people had applauded him for it. So he didn't drive, I said. He couldn't have, Ruth confirmed, which means he hired someone. Hugh closed the laptop. Now we just need to find out who. Finding out who took 2 more days and access to corporate records that Hugh technically shouldn't have been able to pull, but investigative journalists had their ways, and the Oregonian's database went back decades. I met him at the newspaper office in downtown Portland on a gray Thursday morning. The newsroom buzzed with the controlled chaos of deadline pressure phones, ringing keyboards, clicking. The smell of burnt coffee and printer ink thick in the air. Hugh's office was a corner cube buried under stacks of papers, file folders and post-it notes that covered every surface like yellow snow. I cross-referenced the shell companies from your daughter's letter against Oregon corporate filing records. He said, pulling up a spreadsheet on his computer. 12 companies, like she said, but there's a name that appears in 6 of them as a silent partner, buried in the paperwork, never listed as primary, but there if you know where to look. He turned the monitor toward me, a name highlighted in yellow: Clyde Mercer. Who is he? 45 years old. 15 years ago, he killed someone in a drunk driving accident. Vehicular manslaughter. Served 8 years, released 2 years ago, and he's been completely off-grid since. Hugh pulled up another file, a mugshot from 2008. The man staring back at the camera had hard eyes and a face that had seen violence. He's registered as an owner or officer in 6 Shell LLCs connected to Dashiell's network. Never shows up to meetings. Doesn't have a listed address. No tax returns filed. No employment records. It's like he exists just enough to sign corporate documents and then disappears. What kind of man keeps a convicted killer on payroll for exactly this purpose? I asked. Waiting in the shadows for the moment someone threatens his empire. The kind who plans ahead, Hugh said grimly. The kind who knows someday he might need someone eliminated and wants a professional already in place. He pulled up more records, property transfers, bank transactions, all with Clyde Mercer's signature buried in the fine print. Your daughter found him, Hugh said. She documented these companies, which means she knew Mercer was part of the network. She might not have known he was the muscle, but she knew he existed. That can we prove he killed her? Not yet. He's off-grid, no address, no phone records, we can access nothing. But if we can find him, if we can connect him to a vehicle that matches the damage profile Virgil identified, if we can place him near the bridge that night. Hugh closed the folder. He's the driver, Harlan. I'd bet everything on it. Dashiell hired a man who's already killed with a vehicle once before. I stared at the mugshot. Clyde Mercer. The man who'd murdered my daughter for money. The ghost in Dashiell's corporate machinery, doing the work too dirty for the man in the tuxedo, giving speeches about community. And how do we find someone who's been off-grid for 2 years? That's the problem. Hugh drummed his fingers on the desk. No credit cards, no utilities, no rental agreements. Either he's dead, or he's being paid in cash and living somewhere that doesn't require ID. Or Dashiell is keeping him close, I said. Paying him directly, housing him, making sure he stays loyal. That's my guess too. Hugh started to reach for another file, then stopped. He looked at me with sudden realization. But before we chase him down, did you ever open that USB? Because if Leora documented these shell companies, she might have documented Mercer too. There could be communications financial records. Anything that places him at the scene. My stomach dropped. No, I admitted. I tried 8 passwords. The system warned me I had 3 attempts left before it self-destructs. I've been too afraid to try again. Hugh leaned back in his chair, and I could see him calculating the risk. We need that USB unlocked, he said quietly. Before we had a name for the killer, we needed proof. Now we have both, but only if we can access what your daughter died protecting. 3 attempts, 3 chances to guess the password Leora had left for me. 3 opportunities to unlock everything or lose it forever. The day everything changed, I said, repeating her clue. I don't know what that means. Then we figure it out, Hugh said. Together. Because that USB might be the only thing standing between Nova and a murderer who has full custody. For 6 days I stared at that password prompt and did nothing. 3 attempts left. 3 chances to destroy everything my daughter had died to protect. The weekly 10-minute phone call with Nova had become the only thread connecting me to my granddaughter, and I was about to risk it all on a 3-year-old's memory. Dashiell allowed the calls on Sundays at 7 p.m. Exactly 10 minutes. FaceTime only. He monitored from somewhere off camera. I could hear him occasionally, his presence a shadow in Nova's pink bedroom. This Sunday, day 20, I answered on the first ring. Grandpa. Nova's face filled my phone screen, her brown eyes bright. She held up a piece of paper covered in crayon scribbles. Look what I drew. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Tell me about it. This is you, and this is me, and this is... She paused, her small face clouding. This is Mommy, in heaven. My throat closed. Your mommy loved you very much. I know, she taught me songs before she left. Want to hear? I almost said no, almost kept the call safe and normal and precious. But Hugh's words echoed in my head. We need that USB. Yes, I'd love to hear a song, I said. Nova started with Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, singing off-key and forgetting half the words. Then, The Wheels on the Bus. Then she paused, thinking. Mommy had a special number song, she said. It's really long, but I only know the beginning. Every nerve in my body went still. Can you sing it for me? She nodded, her face serious with concentration. 031415926. Mommy said it goes forever, but I only know to 6 as a spicy yasps, and onilaus psarpia. Pi, the mathematical constant. 3.14159. The day everything changed. The day Leora chose mathematics over art in college, switching her major and discovering her love for patterns and numbers. The day she told me she wanted to be a lawyer, to find truth in data, to protect people with evidence instead of emotions. I was already moving toward my laptop phone, still in hand. Sweetheart, that was perfect. Can you sing that again? The number song. Just the first 6 numbers. 031415. One more time slower. She sang it again, drawing out each number like a lullaby. In the background, I heard Dashiell say something about bedtime soon. I typed with shaking fingers 031415. The screen lit up. Folders upon folders appeared, hundreds of them, organized by date, by company, by crime. The screen lit up with hundreds of folders, years of evidence. And I realized my daughter had spent 8 months building a case while singing lullabies to her child, knowing she might not live to see it through. Thank you for the song, Nova, I managed to say. I love you so much. Love you too, Grandpa. Daddy says I have to go now. The call ended. I sat staring at my laptop screen, tears streaming down my face, looking at everything my daughter had died to give me. She'd taught Nova the password as a lullaby, encoded her life's work in her daughter's innocent memory, left me the key in the one place Dashiell would never think to look. I called Celeste, then Ruth, then Hugh and Virgil. By 2 a.m., all 5 of us sat in my living room laptop, connected to the television papers scattered across every surface, staring at the scope of what Leora had accomplished. 417 emails. Hugh said, scrolling through folder after folder. Bank transactions totaling over $5 million annually across 12 shell companies in Oregon and Washington. Virgil pulled up another file. Property records, each transaction inflated by 30 to 50%. They buy a building worth $2 million for $3 million. The extra $1 million is laundered money made clean through the real estate sale. And look at this. Ruth opened a spreadsheet. Accomplice list. Names and roles. Carlton Bentley, Dashiell's current attorney. The man representing him in business deals and corporate filings. He signed incorporation papers for 6 of these shell companies, Hugh said, for a 3% commission on every transaction. Dashiell's lawyer is part of the network, I said. Was, Ruth corrected, is, present tense. Carlton Bentley is actively participating in ongoing criminal conspiracy. You ever see someone's entire life's work laid out in digital folders? Everything they risked, everything they feared, everything they died, for all they're waiting for you to finish what they started. Celeste had been quiet, reading through emails with tears streaming down her face. Now she looked up. She documented threats, Celeste said quietly. Email exchanges where Dashiell warned business partners what happens to people who talk. She has communications about prior incidents, people who crossed him and disappeared or lost everything. How long was she gathering this? Virgil asked. 8 months, I said. According to her letter. 8 months of living with him, sleeping beside him, raising their daughter while documenting every crime. Ruth pulled up another folder. Inside bank statements, corporate registrations, tax documents, communication logs. Everything organized with the precision of a compliance lawyer who knew exactly what prosecutors would need. Your daughter did the work of an entire federal task force, Ruth said, her voice breaking. Alone, while sleeping next to the man who would kill her for it. Hugh opened the first folder in the directory. The title made us all go silent. Evidence for FBI prosecute Dashiell Prescott for murder and RICO violations. Inside, a summary document. 15 pages outlining the criminal network, the money laundering operation, the shell companies, the accomplices, and at the bottom, a single paragraph about the threat to her life and her certainty that if anything happened to her, it would be murder disguised as accident. Ruth looked up from the laptop, tears streaming down her face. She died for this, Harlan. She left it for you to finish her fight. My daughter had built the entire case. We just had to deliver it. We opened the FBI folder at 4 a.m. Inside was one final file. I hadn't prepared myself for a video, labeled Testimony Play First. Nothing prepares you to hear your dead daughter's voice speaking directly to you from the screen telling you, She knew her husband would kill her. The five of us sat in my living room, watching my television as Leora appeared on screen. She wore her gray business suit, the one she'd worn to court appearances. Her hair was pulled back in the practical bun she always used for work. Behind her, I recognized her home office, the one in the Laurelhurst house, where she'd built this entire case while Dashiell slept down the hall. She looked directly at the camera, at me. "If you're watching this, I'm dead." Her voice was calm, steady, like she was presenting evidence to a jury. My husband, Dashiell Prescott, threatened to kill me if I divorced him and sought custody of our daughter, Nova. I stopped breathing. 3 weeks ago, I told him I discovered his money laundering operation. I didn't mean to, it slipped out during an argument. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises and said, "You know too much. If you try to leave, you know what happens to people who threaten my business." Beside me, Celeste was crying silently. Hugh had his hand over his mouth. Ruth sat perfectly still, her legal mind already cataloging the evidentiary value of every word. "I've spent 8 months documenting everything," Leora continued. "Shell companies' bank accounts, accomplices. His partner Clyde Mercer has a history of vehicular violence. I believe Dashiell will use him if he decides I'm too dangerous to keep alive. If I die in a car accident, don't believe it." She smiled then. My daughter, 3 weeks dead, smiled at the camera when she said my name. "Dad, if you're watching, you aren't alone. You have the best friends in the world. I knew they'd help you. Celeste, Ruth, Hugh, everyone at the shelter. They'll fight for Nova when I can't." She leaned closer to the camera, and her voice dropped to the tone she'd used as a little girl when she told me secrets. "I love you. Take care of Nova. Tell her I tried. Tell her I planned for everything except how to say goodbye." The video ended. Dawnlight was starting to filter through my windows. I realized I was crying for the first time in 3 weeks, great heaving sobs that I couldn't control. Celeste put her arm around me. Ruth gripped my hand. These people who dropped everything to help a grieving father they barely knew, wage war against a killer. Leora had been right. I wasn't alone. 3 days later, Dashiell called. I was in my apartment on a Wednesday afternoon when my phone rang. His name on the screen made my stomach clench. He'd never called me directly before, always through lawyers or terse text messages. Harlan. His voice was calm, reasonable. The voice he used for business negotiations and charity galas. "I've heard you've been asking questions around Portland. About the accident. About my business. I need you to stop." I said nothing. "I understand you're grieving," he continued. "Loss makes people do irrational things. But I have excellent lawyers who are prepared to file harassment charges if you continue spreading unfounded accusations about a grieving widower. That won't look good for you. I'm not spreading accusations," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm asking questions about my daughter's death. The police ruled it an accident. The case is closed. You're not a Detective Harlan. You're a 60-year-old volunteer at a women's shelter. This is beyond your scope." The condescension in his tone was deliberate, calculated to remind me of my place. "Also," Dashiell said, and his voice shifted to something colder, "I'm reconsidering those weekly phone calls with Nova. She's been upset after talking to you, crying, asking when you're coming to visit. It's not healthy for her. Maybe it's best if we take a break from them." The moment he threatened Nova's phone calls, I knew we'd moved from investigation to war, and he was willing to use a 3-year-old as a weapon. "You can't cut me off from my granddaughter," I said. "Actually, I can. I'm her legal guardian. I decide who she has contact with. And right now, I'm deciding that your influence is detrimental to her emotional well-being during this difficult time." He paused, letting that sink in. "Stop asking questions, Harlan. Stop bothering my business associates. Stop interfering in matters you don't understand. Or you'll never speak to Nova again." The line went dead. I stood in my apartment, hands shaking with rage, staring at the phone. He knew. Somehow, he knew we were investigating. The black SUV watching Virgil's house. Questions we'd asked that had filtered back to him through his network of lawyers and business partners. He knew we were coming for him, and he was threatening the one thing I couldn't afford to lose. Access to Nova, the only family I had left. 30 seconds later, my phone rang again. Hugh's name this time. "Harlan, we have a problem." His voice was tight with urgency. "I just got a tip from my source at City Hall. Dashiell's already counterattacking." "What do you mean?" "He's filing something. Emergency custody petition, harassment, complaint, something big. My source couldn't get details. But Dashiell met with 3 lawyers this morning, and they're preparing paperwork. He's not just threatening, he's moving." I looked at the encrypted USB drive sitting on my kitchen counter. Everything we needed to destroy him. Everything Leora had died to give us. "How much time do we have?" I asked. "I don't know. Could be days. Could be hours. But he fired first, which means he's scared. Scared people are dangerous." The war had begun, and we were already behind. Hugh's source got us the details within 2 hours. By 10 p.m., I was standing in his newsroom office staring at the evidence of Dashiell's counterattack spread across his desk. Hugh spread 8 surveillance photographs across the surface, all of me at the shelter, all taken from angles that made innocent moments look sinister. "Private investigator," Hugh said, pointing to the first photo. "Professional, expensive. He's been following you for at least 2 weeks. The image showed me helping a woman to her car, my hand on her elbow, to steady her as she navigated the parking lot with a walking boot. From the PI's angle, it looked like I was grabbing her, forcing her. The next photo me, kneeling to talk to a 5-year-old boy who'd been crying in the shelter playroom. From above through the window, it looked like inappropriate contact instead of comfort. One after another, Hugh laid them out. Me alone with women in the records room. Me giving someone a hug that looked predatory from behind. Me sitting too close to a teenager at the homework table. "He photographed you helping a woman to her car looks like you're grabbing her," Hugh said. "You consoling a child looks like inappropriate contact. Every single one designed to suggest impropriety." Ruth arrived while I was still processing. She took one look at the photos and her face went hard. "Emergency custody hearing," she said, dropping a file folder on Hugh's desk. "Filed this afternoon. Hearing scheduled in 60 days. She pulled out more documents. Bank statements I recognized from Leora's USB. "He's bribed 2 shelter employees," Ruth continued. $8,500 each transferred from one of his shell companies 3 days ago. They'll testify you made them uncomfortable, that you crossed boundaries with vulnerable women. "Who?" I asked. "Names are sealed until the hearing, but they're on staff, people you work with every day. 20 years I'd spent helping women and children escape abuse. 20 years of showing up, listening, connecting families to resources. And now my own work was being twisted into a weapon to take away the one child I was trying to protect. He doesn't just want custody," Hugh said quietly. "He wants to destroy you so thoroughly that no one will ever believe anything you say about him. If you're a registered predator, who's going to listen when you claim he's a murderer?" The strategy was elegant, brutal, perfectly Dashiell. "We fight back," Ruth said. "But we need to be smart about it." By 2 a.m., all 5 of us sat in my apartment whiteboards covering every wallpapers scattered across every surface. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but nobody seemed to notice. Ruth stood at the main whiteboard, red marker in hand, outlining our war plan. "And 60 days until the custody hearing," she said, writing the number in large digits. 3 fronts, criminal, financial, custody. We fight all 3 simultaneously. She drew 3 columns. Criminal front proved Dashiell orchestrated Leora's murder. Virgil, that's you. Accident report analysis, find Clyde Mercer, get witness testimony if it exists. Virgil nodded. "I'll coordinate with my contacts at Portland PD and the FBI. We need to find Mercer before the hearing. If we can place him near the bridge that night or find the vehicle. We have murder charges. His financial front exposed the money laundering network. Hugh, your lead. Deliver the USB evidence to federal prosecutors. Get RICO charges filed. Already have a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office," Hugh said. "I'll set up a meeting this week. Custody front defend Harlan's character and prove Dashiell is unfit. That's me and Celeste. We expose the bribed employees present Leora's video testimony and demonstrate that Dashiell is a murderer using his daughter as leverage." Celeste had been taking notes on her laptop. "I'll work with the shelter director to investigate those 2 employees. We have the bank records proving they were bribed. If we can get them to confess before the hearing..." "They won't," I said. "Dashiell's too smart. He'll have leverage on them beyond money." "Then we expose them anyway," Ruth said. "Present the financial evidence. Let the judge decide who's credible." She stepped back from the whiteboard and we all stared at the 3-column war plan she'd created. 60 days, 3 fronts, everything converging at once. You ever watch the sun rise knowing that in exactly 60 days, everything you love will be decided in a single courtroom, and the man who killed your daughter holds most of the cards? I looked around at the 4 people who'd become my army. Hugh, exhausted from 18-hour days of investigation. Ruth, who'd come out of retirement to wage legal war. Virgil, using 30 years of law enforcement contacts to hunt a killer. Celeste, who'd dropped everything to organize our defense. Why are you doing this? I asked. Really, you barely know me. You could all walk away. Celeste answered first. Because you've helped hundreds of people walk away from men like Dashel. Someone has to help you. Because your daughter built a federal case alone while living with her murderer, Hugh said. That kind of courage deserves to be honored. Because Nova deserves better than growing up with a killer, Ruth added. Virgil just shrugged. Because it's right. The sun was starting to rise over Mount Hood, visible through my apartment window. Portland spread out below us, the city waking up to another ordinary day. Somewhere out there, Dashel was sleeping in the house he'd stolen from my daughter. Clyde Mercer was hiding in whatever hole he'd crawled into after murdering Leora. The two bribed employees were probably lying awake, wondering if they'd made a mistake taking blood money. As dawn light broke over the mountain, I looked out at the city and felt something shift inside me. Not hope exactly, but determination, purpose. I didn't know that in those 60 days ahead, I would meet 3 people who would change my life forever. A terrified truck driver who'd witnessed the crash. A beaten woman in hiding who knew Dashel's secrets, and the man who'd rammed my daughter off Fremont Bridge. One conversation, one testimony, one confession at a time. We would build the case that would bring them all down. The war had begun, and we had 60 days to win it. The first person I met during those 60 days was the truck driver. Hugh found him on day 28. Wade Spencer's hands shook so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup, and he kept glancing at the diner's parking lot, like he expected someone to walk through the door and put a bullet in him. The diner sat on Highway 26, west of Portland, one of those old truck stops with plastic tables and bottomless coffee and a grease smell that never quite left your clothes. Wade, 45, was a long-haul trucker who had crossed the Fremont Bridge that rainy night and saw everything and had been too terrified to speak. Hugh had tracked him through trucking company logs and delivery schedules, cross-referencing times and routes, until he found the one driver whose manifest put him on the bridge at exactly 9:47 p.m. Then he'd made calls, asked questions, and finally convinced Wade to meet us with a promise of anonymity. That promise lasted until we sat down. I can't say anything, Wade said, before Hugh even finished the introductions. His eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, and he kept one hand in his jacket pocket like he was clutching something. And they know where my daughter goes to school. They know her name. Who knows? Hugh asked. I don't know who. 2 days after the accident, someone followed my ex-wife to Riverside Elementary, walked right up to Emma on the playground and said, "Your daddy saw something he shouldn't have. Tell him to keep his mouth shut or we'll have to visit you again." The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I set it down carefully. "She's 8 years old," Wade continued, and his voice cracked. "She came home crying, terrified. What kind of person threatens an 8-year-old? The same kind who murders someone on a bridge and calls it an accident. "We can protect you," Hugh said. "FBI protection, witness relocation if needed. But we need to know what you saw that night." Wade shook his head. "No FBI, no police, no record of this conversation. I have a daughter to protect. 20 years helping people escape violence taught me one thing. You don't push a terrified witness. You remind them why the truth matters more than the fear." I leaned forward, keeping my voice quiet and direct. "My daughter is dead, Wade. I'm not asking you to testify. I'm not asking you to put your name on any document. I only want to know, how did she go? Did she suffer? Was it quick? His eyes met mine for the first time. I saw the weight he'd been carrying for 4 weeks, the knowledge that had been eating him alive. "Give me 15 minutes, I said. "Tell me what happened to my child. Then we'll leave, and you'll never hear from us again." The parking lot stayed empty. The waitress refilled our coffee and walked away. Wade stared at his shaking hands for a long moment. Then he started talking. "I was heading east on the bridge during the rainstorm," he said quietly. "Around 9:40, maybe 9:45. Visibility was terrible, rain coming down in sheets, wipers barely keeping up." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, anchoring himself. "I saw a black SUV tailing a silver sedan, staying close. Too close for the conditions. The sedan was in the right lane going the speed limit. The SUV was riding maybe 10 feet off her bumper. Leora's car had been silver, A Honda Accord she'd bought used 3 years ago because it was practical and reliable and good on gas. At the bridge apex, the SUV accelerated. I saw it happen. It rammed her from behind, hard. Not a tap, not a nudge, a full-force collision at highway speed. When he said, rammed her from behind, not sideswiped, not clipped, but deliberately rammed, I knew my daughter's last seconds were terror, not an accident. She'd known it was coming. She'd seen it in her rearview mirror. She went into the guardrail. Wade continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The impact sent her car spinning, and then she went over, through the railing and into the river. And the SUV didn't stop, didn't brake, didn't slow down, just kept going like nothing happened, accelerated off the bridge and disappeared into the rain. Hugh had his notebook out but wasn't writing. He was recording this on his phone, discreetly positioned on the table. My dash cam caught the whole thing, Wade said, including the license plate. I pulled the footage that night, made a backup, and tried to decide what to do with it. And then someone found you, I said. 2 days later, I don't know how. I didn't report it, didn't call the police, didn't tell anyone except my ex-wife. But they knew. They knew I was there, and they knew I saw. He pulled his hand from his jacket pocket. In it, he held a folded photograph, the edges worn from being touched too many times. I've been carrying this for 4 weeks, Wade said. Every day trying to figure out what to do. If I give it to the police, they'll know. If I testify, my daughter pays the price. But if I do nothing, he looked at me, and I saw the same impossible choice I'd been facing since the door slammed in my face on day 5. If you promise me they get caught, Wade said slowly. If you promise my daughter stays safe, if you can guarantee that whoever did this goes to prison for life and never gets a chance to hurt Emma, then it's yours. We'll get them, I said. All of them. The driver, the man who ordered it, everyone who threatened your child. I promise you that. Wade's hand trembled as he unfolded the photograph. It was grainy, rain-spotted, taken through a truck windshield in the middle of a storm, but it was clear enough. A black SUV, Oregon plates. The license number, visible even through the rain and distance. He slid it across the table between the coffee cups and the sugar packets. That's the vehicle that killed your daughter. Now, we just needed to prove who was driving. We had the license plate by nightfall. Getting a name took 1 more day. Virgil's fingers moved across the keyboard, entering the plate number from Wade's rain-spotted photograph into the Oregon DMV database, while I held my breath. We were back in his home office in Milwaukee, surrounded by 30 years of police work, memorialized in photographs on the walls. Hugh sat beside me, laptop open to Leora's USB files, ready to cross-reference whatever came up. The DMV system loaded slowly. Virgil drummed his fingers on the desk. Could be registered to a person, could be a company, he said. Could be stolen plates, could be... The screen populated. Virgil leaned forward, reading. Black Escalade 2018, registered to Columbia River Properties, LLC. He looked at Hugh. That mean anything? Hugh was already scrolling through the shell company list. His face went still. Columbia River Properties number 7 on Leora's shell company list. Incorporated in Delaware, doing business in Oregon. Holds 3 properties in the Pearl District, valued at approximately $4 million. Owner of record, I asked. Virgil clicked through more screens. Clyde Mercer. The pieces weren't just fitting together. They were locking into place like a prosecutor's dream. Motive means opportunity, and now the murder weapon registered to the hired killer. We have him, Hugh said quietly. Dashiell's alibi proves he didn't drive. The SUV that killed Leora is registered to Clyde Mercer. Wade's testimony puts Mercer at the scene. Leora's video establishes motive and threat. The USB proves the money laundering network connecting them. Virgil picked up his phone. Who are you calling? I asked. FBI, not Portland PD. He started dialing. This is bigger than local jurisdiction, and some local cops can be bought. We need the feds. They'll have resources to find Mercer, and they'll want the RICO case your daughter built. He put the phone on speaker. A woman answered on the second ring. FBI Portland Field Office. How may I direct your call? Agent Virgil Frost, retired Portland Police. I need to speak to someone in the organized crime unit. I have evidence of murder for hire and a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation. There was a pause. Please hold. The hold music was generic and bland. Virgil looked at me across the desk. This is it, he said. Once we hand this to federal prosecutors, there's no taking it back. Dashel will know we're coming. Things will escalate fast. Good, I said. Let them come. 6 days later, Paloma found me at the shelter. I was in the small conference room reviewing intake paperwork for new residents when she knocked on the doorframe. The expression on her face told me she had something important. Harlan, do you have a minute? Or spike. Celeste was with me working on donor thank you letters. She looked up, read Paloma's expression, and quietly excused herself. Paloma closed the door and sat across from me. There's a woman at the downtown shelter, she said without preamble. She came in 4 days ago. Bruises on her arms, cracked rib, the usual story fell down. Stairs walked into a door. I'd heard variations of that story 1,000 times. She mentioned a man, Paloma continued. Pearl District developer, real estate, very charming, very wealthy, very dangerous. He beat her when she tried to end the relationship. My attention sharpened. Did she give a name? Paloma shook her head. She's too scared. Won't even tell the shelter director. But she talked to me a little survivor to survivor, you know. And she said something that made me think of you. She leaned forward, keeping her voice low, even though we were alone. She said he threatened her after your daughter died. Said, you know what happened to my wife. You want to be next. Harlan? I think it's him. I think she was seeing Dashel. You spend 20 years building something, helping people, showing up, never expecting anything back. And then one day those connections become the evidence chain that brings down a killer. Can you introduce us? I asked. Maybe. She's fragile right now, terrified. If she thinks you're connected to him in any way, she'll run. Tell her I'm a grandfather trying to protect his granddaughter from a dangerous man. Tell her I need to know if the man who hurt her is the same man who has custody of my 3-year-old. Paloma nodded slowly. That might work, but Harlan, be careful with her. She won't talk if she doesn't trust you. These things take time. Yet how much time do we have until the custody hearing? 25 days. She'd been keeping track. Everyone had. Until she decides to leave Portland and disappear, could be tomorrow, could be never. Women in her position don't stay in one place long. Set up a meeting, I said. Somewhere public, somewhere she feels safe. I'll do whatever it takes. Paloma studied me for a long moment. We'd sat in rooms like this 3 years ago when she was the one running and I was the one offering help. She'd trusted me then with her life and her children's safety. Now I was asking her to trust me with someone else's. There's a park, she said finally. Mount Tabor. Lots of people, open sightlines, easy exits. I'll tell her I want to introduce her to someone who can help. I won't mention Dashel's name until she's ready. When? I'll call you. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. She has information, Harlan, I can tell. The way she talks about him, the things she almost says, but stops herself. She knows something. Maybe enough to help you. Or enough to get herself killed, I said. That too. Paloma squeezed my hand the same way I'd held hers 3 years ago when she was the one running from violence. Be careful with her, Harlan. She won't talk if she doesn't trust you. But if you can reach her... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The woman who could testify to Dashel's confession was waiting. I just had to convince her that speaking the truth was worth the risk of dying for it. Paloma called 3 days later. The meeting was set for Mount Tabor Park, public and safe, under the oak tree where joggers and dog walkers passed every few minutes. She sat on the bench waiting for us, 28 years old, with heavy makeup that couldn't quite hide the fading bruises along her jawline. Saskia Valencia wore heavy makeup over faded bruises and had returned to the man who beat her because he'd threatened her family. I recognized the pattern before she spoke a word, the way she positioned herself at the far end of the bench, keeping clear sightlines to all approaches, the way her hands stayed in her jacket pockets, probably clutching pepper spray or a phone with 911 already dialed. Celeste and I approached slowly. Paloma stood from the bench and made the introductions. Saskia, this is Harlan and Celeste. They help people at the shelter. Saskia's eyes flicked between us, assessing threat levels. The August wind was picking up clouds gathering overhead. We had maybe an hour before rain. Paloma said you have questions, Saskia said. Her voice was quiet but steady. About a man. About Dashel Prescott. I said deciding honesty was the only approach that would work. My daughter was married to him. She died 6 weeks ago. Saskia's face went pale under the makeup. You're Leora's father. You knew her. No, but She looked at Paloma, then back at me. I heard about her, from him. Celeste sat down on the bench, leaving space. I stayed standing, not wanting to crowd her. How do you know Dashiell? Celeste asked gently. Saskia's hands tightened in her pockets. We were seeing each other for about a year. He said he was separated going through a divorce. I believed him. When did you find out the truth? When your daughter died. He called me that night, told me his wife had been in an accident. That's when I realized he'd been lying about everything. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the path. Saskia wrapped her arms around herself. When I tried to leave after that, he got angry, really angry. He grabbed my arm. She touched the bruise on her jaw. And he said, "You know what happened to my wife? I handled her. You want to be next?" The words hung in the air between us. Direct confession, admissible testimony. There's more. Saskia continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The night she died, I was at his house. He thought I was asleep, but I heard him on the phone. He said, "Clean it up." No traces? Then he saw me standing in the doorway, and she didn't finish. She didn't have to. The bruises told that story. Will you testify? I asked, in court under oath. I'll testify if you can protect me. Witness protection, new identity, whatever it takes. But if you lose, her eyes met mine. You know what happens to me, right? She was another woman I'd failed to save from him. But maybe if she was brave enough to speak, she could help me save the one person who mattered most. Before I tell you what happened 4 nights later, if you're still with me, comment A, if you think I should have gone to get her that night, regardless of the law. Or B, if you think I was right to trust the legal process. Add one short reason, because this next moment shatters everything. Please note, what follows includes some recreated details for emotional impact, but the core truth remains. The phone rang at 1:23 in the morning on day 42. I grabbed it without looking at the screen, heart already pounding, because nothing good happens at 1:23 a.m. Grandpa, Nova's voice, whispering, crying. Sweetheart, are you okay? I'm scared. Daddy is yelling really loud and he broke something. It sounded like glass. I'm hiding in my closet. The sound of a 3-year-old whispering, I'm scared, at 1 in the morning, is a sound that rewrites every timeline, every strategy, every careful plan you ever made. Can you go to your room and lock the door? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm while my hands shook. Can you be very quiet? I'm already in my room. I locked it, but I can hear him and I'm scared and I want to go with you, Grandpa. I want Mommy. I want... The call cut off. I hit redial. It went straight to voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. I sat there in my dark bedroom staring at my phone and ran through the options. Drive to the house he'd call the police, have me arrested for trespassing and harassment. Break down the door, same result, plus assault charges that would destroy any chance of custody. Call 911 and say what that my granddaughter called scared because her father was yelling. They'd tell me it was a domestic matter, that he had full custody, that unless I witnessed physical abuse, there was nothing they could do. 20 years helping women escape violence, and I couldn't protect one 3-year-old girl trapped in a house with a murderer because the law said he had rights and I had none. I called Ruth. She answered on the 3rd ring, groggy but alert the moment I explained. You can't go there, she said. I know what you're thinking, but you can't. He'll use it against you in the custody hearing. He'll say you're unstable, that you broke into his home in the middle of the night. She called me terrified, and that breaks my heart. But if you go there now, you lose her forever. We're 18 days from the custody hearing. 18 days, Harlan. We can't give him ammunition. She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing something is right doesn't make it feel any less like abandoning a child who called you for help. The phone slipped from my hand onto the bed. I sat there in the dark, staring at the screen where Nova's number had been, and realized something that shattered every careful plan we'd made. I didn't have 60 days anymore. I didn't have 60 hours. My granddaughter was in danger right now, and I was powerless to stop it. Nova's call haunted me for 3 days. Then Dashiell made his move. Ruth's office smelled like old books and strong coffee when I walked in on day 43. The manila envelope on her desk sat between us like a live grenade. It arrived this morning, Ruth said, sliding it across to me. Emergency motion. He's not waiting for the custody hearing. I opened it. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out. Cognitive decline, recent heart condition diagnosis, irrational decision-making, unfit to provide care for minor child. He's claiming I'm incompetent, I said. He's claiming you're medically and mentally incapable of caring for a 3-year-old, that your heart condition makes you a danger to her safety, that you've been making erratic decisions, harassing him, spreading conspiracy theories about the accident. Ruth's pen tapped against her legal pad, a nervous habit I'd never seen before. "When's the hearing?" I asked. "Yes, 17 days, day 60. He filed for an emergency competency evaluation." I stood abruptly from the chair and walked to her window. Pioneer Courthouse Square spread out below, people going about their normal lives, shopping, eating lunch, laughing. None of them knew that my entire world was collapsing 17 floors above their heads. "If he wins," I asked without turning around, "if the judge determines you're incompetent, he gets Nova back immediately. No custody battle, no trial, just a medical ruling that you're unfit, and she goes home with him." I watched a mother and daughter cross the square below the little girl, skipping ahead, while her mom smiled. "How did he know about my heart condition?" I asked. "I haven't told anyone except Celeste and my doctor." Ruth's silence answered the question. Dashiell had access to my medical records somehow, either through corruption or surveillance or connections I couldn't begin to trace. I turned back to face her. "What do we need to do?" Ruth's expression shifted from concern to something harder, more determined. "We prove him wrong. Medical evaluation, psychiatric assessment, character witnesses. We show the judge you're not just competent, you're the best guardian Nova could possibly have. And we have 17 days. "He's scared," Ruth said. "This is a desperate move. Scared people are dangerous, but they also make mistakes. We just need to be better prepared than he is." The next 10 days became a blur of doctors' offices and depositions. Day 50. Celeste put me through a full medical workup in her clinic. EKG, cognitive function tests, physical stamina evaluation. The machines beeped and hummed while she took notes. "Your heart condition is manageable," she said, reviewing the results. "Medication controlled, no restrictions on daily activities. You're cleared to care for a child. I'll put that in writing." Day 52. Hugh conducted a psychiatric evaluation in his office, 2 hours of questions about my mental state, my decision-making process, my emotional stability. "Patient shows no signs of cognitive impairment," he wrote in his report. "Demonstrates rational thought processes, appropriate emotional responses, and sound judgment. Fully competent to make decisions regarding childcare." Day 54, Wade Spencer sat across from Ruth in her conference room, giving his deposition. 40 years of friendship condensed into legal testimony. "I've known him since we were 20, Wade said. "He's the most stable, reliable person I know. When my marriage fell apart, he was there. When I lost my job, he helped. He spent his whole life helping people. Nova couldn't be safer with anyone." Day 56. Saskia Valencia's voice came through Ruth's conference room speakers via phone recording. She was still in hiding, too afraid to appear in person. "Nova talks about her grandpa constantly," Saskia's recorded voice said. "She draws pictures of him. She asks when she can see him. When she's with him, she's happy, safe. That's what matters." Day 58. Virgil provided a sanitized FBI statement confirming that Dashiell Prescott was under active federal investigation for financial crimes. The statement was careful, revealing nothing classified, but establishing that the FBI considered Dashiell a person of interest in ongoing criminal matters. Between depositions on day 56, I went home to grab lunch and found something taped to my refrigerator. Nova's drawing from weeks ago, the one Dashiell had let her make during one of our supervised calls. 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small. "Grandpa and me," written in her wobbly 3-year-old handwriting. I stood there in my kitchen staring at those crayon figures and felt something break open in my chest. This wasn't about legal strategy or evidence or winning arguments. This was about a little girl who'd lost her mother and needed someone to hold her hand. I took a photo of the drawing and texted it to Ruth with a message. "This is what we're fighting for." By day 60, we had everything: medical clearance, psychiatric evaluation, character witnesses, FBI confirmation of Dashiell's criminal investigation. Ruth's case strategy filled a whiteboard in her office, every argument mapped, every piece of evidence indexed. "You feeling ready?" she asked during our final prep session that evening. "Should I be?" "Honestly, yes. We have an overwhelming case. His motion is baseless and we can prove it. The judge will see through this." But something had been bothering me all day, a prickling awareness at the back of my neck. the sense of being watched. I think he's had someone following me, I admitted. The past few days, same car in my neighborhood, different times, but always there. Ruth's expression darkened. Black SUV, how did you know? Because I've seen it too, parked across from my office yesterday, gone before I could get the plate number. We looked at each other across her desk, and I saw the same realization dawn in her eyes that had been growing in mine. Dashiell wasn't just fighting in court. He was watching us, tracking us, preparing for something beyond legal maneuvering. Be careful tonight, Ruth said. The hearing's at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Get some sleep if you can. I drove home through dark Portland streets, checking my rearview mirror more than the road ahead. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, I was convinced I was being paranoid. Then I walked into my apartment and looked out my living room window. Across the street, parked directly in front of the building opposite mine, sat a black SUV, engine running, someone inside. As I watched, the interior light flicked on for just a second, long enough to see the silhouette of a man watching my building. The hearing was in 9 hours. I pulled out my phone and called Ruth. We have a problem, I said when she answered. I think Dashiell's done playing by the rules. The black SUV was gone by morning, but the message had been delivered. The marble floors of Multnomah County Courthouse echoed with my footsteps at 8:45 in the morning, 48 hours after someone watched my house from a black SUV. Ruth walked beside me, carrying a leather briefcase that held everything we'd built over the past 2 months. Medical records, depositions, bank statements, proof. Courtroom 4 was packed. Reporters filled the gallery, notebooks ready. I recognized a few faces from the shelter community, Paloma, Celeste. Wade sitting in the back rows like reinforcements I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Dashiell arrived at 8:55. He wore a suit that probably cost $5,000 charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes perfectly tailored. Behind him walked Carlton Bentley, Oregon's most expensive family law attorney with a perfect custody trial record in a suit that cost more than my truck. They moved through the courtroom like they owned it, projecting the kind of confidence that comes from never losing. Ruth leaned close to me. Let them talk first, she whispered. We'll bury them with facts. At exactly 9 o'clock, Judge Mary Ann Fletcher entered. She was a stern woman in her mid-50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her reputation for no-nonsense rulings preceded her. Ruth had said getting her assigned to this case was either very lucky or very unlucky, depending on whose evidence held up. This court will hear emergency motion 2023-CV-8847, Judge Fletcher said, settling into her chair. Competency determination regarding custody of minor child Nova Prescott. Mr. Bentley, you filed this motion. Proceed. Carlton stood buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. Your Honor, we will demonstrate that Mr. Harlan Rawlings poses a clear and present danger to this child's welfare. Due to documented medical conditions, cognitive decline, and a pattern of irrational behavior, he is unfit to provide care for a 3-year-old. He spoke smoothly, professionally, making it sound reasonable, like he was protecting Nova instead of trying to return her to a murderer. We have medical evidence. Carlton continued, witness testimony and photographic documentation of Mr. Rawlings' declining mental state. The child's father, Mr. Prescott, seeks only to ensure his daughter's safety. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds, saw Leora's face the day Nova was born. My daughter holding her newborn, looking at me with exhausted joy and saying, Dad, I need you to promise you'll always protect her. I'd promised. This was me keeping that promise. Carlton's presentation took 30 minutes. He showed the court my medical records somehow obtained, despite privacy laws highlighting my recent heart condition diagnosis. He presented a psychiatrist's report I'd never authorized, claiming I showed signs of age-related cognitive impairment. He called witnesses who testified I'd been acting erratically at the shelter, forgetting names, seeming confused. Then came the photographs. Carlton held up the first one, projected on a screen for the court to see. It showed me at the shelter, bent over slightly, hand to my forehead, eyes unfocused. The caption read, Mr. Rawlings appearing disoriented during work shift, August 15th. The photo froze my blood. It was me. But I'd never been that confused, never looked that lost. It was doctored, the angle, the lighting, the context, all manipulated to make me look incompetent. 3 more photos followed, each one making me look worse, more confused, more unstable, more dangerous to leave alone with a child. The gallery murmured. I saw doubt creeping into faces I recognized. Even Paloma looked worried. Then Carlton called his star witnesses. The court calls Ms. Jennifer Morrison and Mr. David Hayes employees at the NE Portland Women's Shelter, where Mr. Rawlings volunteers. 2 people I'd worked with for years walked to the witness stand. I barely recognized them. Jennifer wouldn't meet my eyes. Ms. Morrison. Carlton said, "Can you describe Mr. Rawlings' behavior over the past 3 months?" Jennifer's voice was quiet but clear. "He's been increasingly forgetful, agitated. During his visits with Nova, he forgot which medications to give her 3 separate times. We had serious concerns about his mental state. It was a lie, all of it. I'd never given Nova medications. Dashiell controlled everything about her care. I'd never been alone with her long enough to be forgetful or agitated. David's testimony was worse. He claimed I'd had angry outbursts, confused residents' names, needed help with basic tasks. Painted a picture of someone sliding into dementia, dangerous and unpredictable. By the time Carlton finished the courtroom, atmosphere had shifted. Reporters were writing furiously. Judge Fletcher's expression had gone from neutral to concerned. Ruth gripped my hand under the table. This was the all is lost moment. The evidence appeared damning. Dashiell sat at his table, looking appropriately worried about his daughter's safety, the perfect concerned father. Judge Fletcher looked at me directly. "Mr. Rawlings, this is your opportunity to respond. Do you have anything to say to these allegations?" I stood slowly, feeling every one of my 60 years in my knees. Ruth stood with me, her hand still on my arm. "I do, Your Honor," I said. My voice was steady, calm. "And I'd like to start by asking those 2 employees about the $15,000 they each received last week." The courtroom went silent. Jennifer's face went pale. David's eyes widened. Carlton froze mid-reach for his water glass. Ruth slid a manila folder across our table to me. I opened it, and the rustle of papers was the only sound in the courtroom. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer records, signed affidavits from Hughes Financial Investigation. Every dollar traced from Dashiell's shell companies to Jennifer Morrison and David Hayes. $15,000 each, deposited 6 days ago. Dashiell's face went white when he saw the folder. Carlton stopped mid-sentence, whatever he'd been about to say dying on his lips. Judge Fletcher leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "Mr. Rawlings," she said, "what exactly are you suggesting?" I handed the first bank statement to the bailiff, watching Carlton Bentley's confident smile crack like thin ice. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "These documents prove that 3 of Mr. Prescott's witnesses received identical payments of $8,500 each, wired from Prescott Holdings LLC accounts on August 14th, 2 days before their depositions. Ruth stood, her reading glasses catching the fluorescent light. "We have corresponding bank records from all 3 witnesses, Jennifer Morrison, David Hayes, and Jeffrey Bradford. Each received wire transfers with the memo line, consulting fees, despite none of them ever working as consultants for Prescott Holdings." I watched Jennifer Morrison's face drain of color. She was gripping the witness rail so hard her knuckles had gone white. David Hayes was suddenly very interested in his shoes. Only Jeffrey Bradford maintained his composure, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes, wondering if he should cut a deal before the others did. "This is preposterous," Carlton sputtered, but his voice had lost its courtroom authority. "Consulting fees are perfectly legitimate business expenses. Guests, Mr. Morrison works as a grocery store manager." Ruth interrupted smoothly. "Mr. Hayes is a retired postal worker. Mr. Bradford is a high school gym teacher. None of them possess any consulting expertise relevant to Prescott Holdings' investment portfolio management business." Judge Fletcher's expression had gone from skeptical to glacial. "Mr. Bentley, do you have documentation showing what consulting services these 3 individuals provided to justify $8,500 each?" Carlton opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "We would need to review our records." "Your Honor, I have the contracts right here," I said, passing another set of documents to the bailiff, or rather, the backdated contracts that were created 3 days ago. "Notice the paper stock doesn't match Prescott Holdings' letterhead from August. Notice the digital signature metadata shows a creation date of September 17th. Jennifer Morrison made a small choking sound. Mrs. Morrison, Judge Fletcher said quietly, do you have something you'd like to share with this court? The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. I could hear the court reporter's fingers hovering over the keys. The journalists in the gallery had stopped taking notes, frozen in anticipation. He gave me cash, Jennifer whispered, then louder, her voice cracking. Dashiell Prescott came to my house personally. He handed me an envelope with $8,500 bills and told me exactly what to say about Harlan Rawlings. He said, if I didn't, he'd make sure the IRS audited me and that my son's college applications would be flagged. The courtroom erupted. Carlton was on his feet, objecting to everything and nothing. Dashiell had gone perfectly still, his face a mask I couldn't read. Judge Fletcher's gavel cracked like thunder. Order, Mr. Bentley, sit down. Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Hayes, Mr. Bradford, your testimony is hereby stricken from the record, and I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation into perjury and witness tampering charges. She turned to Dashiell, and her voice could have frozen hell. Mr. Prescott, you are treading on very thin ice. Ruth caught my eye, gave the smallest nod. Phase 2. Your Honor, she said, we have one additional piece of evidence. Video testimony from Leora Prescott recorded 6 weeks before her death. The screen mounted on the courtroom wall flickered to life, and there was my daughter. She looked thin, tired, but her voice was steady as she stared directly into the camera. My name is Leora Prescott. Today is June 2nd, 2023. I'm recording this because I'm afraid. My husband, Dashiell Prescott, has been running a money laundering operation through his investment firm for the past 3 years. When I discovered it and threatened to go to the authorities, he told me that accidents happen. He said I could disappear and no one would question it. He said he'd make sure my father never saw Nova again. I'd seen this video a dozen times since finding the USB drive. It still felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. I have documentation of everything, Leora continued. $5 million laundered through shell companies. Client accounts used to clean money from sources I can't even trace. When I confronted him, he grabbed me by the throat and told me I had a choice. Stay quiet and stay alive, or talk and see what happens. She pulled down the collar of her shirt, revealing bruises in the clear shape of fingers. This was 4 days ago. I'm hiding these files because I know what's coming. If you're watching this, it means I was right. The screen went black. The courtroom was silent except for someone's stifled sob. I thought it might have been Ruth. Judge Fletcher's voice was barely above a whisper. Is there more? Yes, Your Honor, Ruth said. We have Nova's forensic interview conducted by a certified child psychologist 3 days ago, with Mr. Prescott's court-appointed supervisor present. The screen flickered again. This time it showed a gentle room with soft chairs and toys scattered across a low table. Nova sat in a purple beanbag, holding the stuffed bear I'd given her last Christmas, the one with the worn ear from where she'd chewed it as a baby. The interviewer, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, spoke gently. Nova, can you tell me about your mommy and daddy? Nova's small voice filled the courtroom. Mommy was nice. She read me stories. Daddy gets mad. What happens when Daddy gets mad? A pause. Nova hugged the bear tighter. He yells. Sometimes he hits Mommy. She cries in the bathroom after. Every molecule of oxygen seemed to have been sucked from the room. I gripped the table edge, forcing myself to breathe, to stay still, to let the truth speak for itself. Did you see Daddy hit Mommy? The interviewer asked gently. Yes, lots of times. Once Mommy's nose was bleeding and she told me it was okay, but it wasn't okay. Nova looked up directly at the camera. Her brown eyes, Leora's eyes, were too old for a 4-year-old face. Grandpa, is Daddy going to jail now? The courtroom erupted. Judge Fletcher's gavel cracked 3 times before the noise subsided. Reporters were typing furiously. 2 bailiffs had positioned themselves between the gallery and the defense table, where Dashiell sat frozen. Nova's face had disappeared from the screen, but her question still hung in the air like smoke. We will reconvene after a 90-minute recess, Judge Fletcher announced. Mr. Prescott, you will remain in this courthouse under supervision. Court is adjourned. The lunch break felt like holding my breath underwater. Ruth Celeste Hugh and I sat in a conference room down the hall, barely touching the sandwiches someone had brought. Virgil joined us at 1 o'clock, carrying a manila folder he set on the table without comment. Judge Fletcher's gavel brought the afternoon session to order at 1:30, and Ruth stood with a USB drive that would end Carlton Bentley's career. "Your Honor," Ruth said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd already won, "the evidence we're about to present was discovered on the USB drive Leora Prescott left for her father. It concerns not only Mr. Dashiell Prescott's criminal activities, but also the involvement of his legal counsel." Carlton Bentley went very still. I watched his hand pause halfway to his water glass. "Objection," he said, but there was no force behind it. "This is highly irregular." "Your Honor," Ruth continued, "these are incorporation documents for 3 shell companies, Prescott Holdings, LLEs, Cascade Finance Group, and Portland Investment Partners. All 3 were used to launder money through Mr. Prescott's investment firm, and all 3 bear Carlton Bentley's signature as registered agent." She handed the documents to the bailiff. I watched Carlton's face drain of color as the pages passed in front of Judge Fletcher. The financial records show that Mr. Bentley received a 3% commission on every transaction processed through these shell companies. Over the past 3 years, that amounts to approximately $150,000. He wasn't just defending his client, Your Honor. He was an active participant in the money laundering operation. The courtroom went silent. Carlton stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Your Honor, I need to withdraw from this case immediately. There's clearly a conflict of interest that I was not previously aware. Sit down, Mr. Bentley." Judge Fletcher's voice could have cut glass. "You're not going anywhere. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. Bentley doesn't leave this courtroom. I'm referring this matter to the Oregon State Bar and the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation." The bailiff moved to stand behind Carlton's chair. Carlton sat down slowly, his hands shaking. Dashiell was now completely alone at the defense table. His expensive lawyer revealed as a co-conspirator, his carefully constructed fortress crumbling stone by stone. I looked at Dashiell sitting there, abandoned by the man who'd spent 2 months trying to paint me as incompetent and dangerous and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. This was what justice looked like when the truth finally surfaced. "Your Honor," Ruth said, "we have 3 witnesses to call. The first is Wade Spencer." Wade walked to the stand with the same steady gait he'd probably used climbing into his truck cab for 30 years. He wore a pressed shirt and tie, his weathered hands folded in his lap as he was sworn in. "Mr. Spencer," Ruth said gently, "can you describe what you witnessed on the morning of July 19th, 2023? I was driving eastbound on Highway 26. Wade said, his voice clear despite his age. Traffic was light. I saw a black Chevy Suburban late model. Tinted windows swerve across 2 lanes and T-bone a silver sedan at the Powell Boulevard intersection. It wasn't an accident. That SUV accelerated into the turn. It was deliberate." "Did you see the driver of the SUV?" "No, ma'am. The windows were too dark, but I saw the license plate clear enough to photograph it before the vehicle fled the scene." "Thank you, Mr. Spencer." Carlton didn't cross-examine. He sat at the defense table staring at his hands, a man watching his career and freedom evaporate. Saskia took the stand next, and I wanted to spare her this. But she'd insisted, and now she sat with her back straight and her voice steady. "Ms. Valencia," Ruth said, "have you had any contact with Dashiell Prescott outside of this courtroom?" "Yes. 6 weeks ago, he approached me outside the dental office where I work. He said if I continued seeing Harlan Rawlings, I would regret it. He knew my work schedule, my home address, and my daughter's school. I felt threatened enough to file a police report with the Portland Police Department on August 7th. Dashiell's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. What could he say? The police report was on file. The threat was documented. "Thank you, Ms. Valencia." Virgil Frost was the last witness. He walked to the stand in his usual dark suit, carrying a single folder. When he was sworn in, his voice had the flat precision of someone who'd testified in federal court 100 times. "Agent Frost," Ruth said, "can you tell the court about recent developments in the federal investigation? At 0600 hours this morning, FBI agents arrested Clyde Mercer in Seattle, Washington. Mr. Mercer is a former military contractor who operates a vehicle rental business. He's agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence." My heart was pounding. This was it. Mr. Mercer has confessed that on July the 15th, 2023, Dashiell Prescott paid him $50,000 to cause a fatal traffic collision involving Leora Prescott's vehicle. Mr. Mercer used a rented Chevrolet Suburban, drove to Portland, and carried out the attack on July 19th. He provided GPS data, financial records, and text messages confirming Mr. Prescott's direct involvement in planning and ordering the murder. $50,000. That's what my daughter's life was worth to the man who'd promised to love her. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of pens on paper as journalists captured every word. Dashiell's face had gone gray. Judge Fletcher set down her pen and looked directly at Virgil Frost. Agent Frost, I'm issuing a bench order for immediate federal custody. Please have your colleagues join us in this courtroom. Virgil pulled out his phone. Dashiell's hands started to shake. The courtroom door opened less than 3 minutes after Virgil made the call. 3 FBI agents in tactical gear entered courtroom 4 at 4:15, and Judge Fletcher didn't waste a single word. Mr. Rawlings, please stand. I stood feeling Ruth's steadying hand on my shoulder for just a moment before she let go. This was it. After 62 days of war documentation, sleepless nights, and fighting through a system designed to move slowly, this was the moment that would determine Nova's future. I have reviewed all evidence presented in this emergency custody hearing, Judge Fletcher said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The court finds overwhelming proof of fraud, witness tampering, money laundering, and credible evidence of murder for hire. More importantly, this court has reviewed testimony and forensic evidence showing domestic violence in the Prescott household and clear danger to the minor child. She looked directly at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected: compassion. I hereby grant Harold Rawlings full and permanent legal custody of Nova Prescott, effective immediately. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order prohibiting Dashiell Prescott from any contact with the minor child, and I am terminating all of Mr. Prescott's parental rights under Oregon Revised Statute 109.119. Mr. Prescott, you are remanded to federal custody. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like the end of one world and the beginning of another. Permanent custody, terminated parental rights. Even if Dashiell somehow avoided life in prison, he would never touch Nova again. Never manipulate her, never hurt her. Never teach her that violence was normal or that money could buy truth. I couldn't speak. Ruth gripped my arm, her eyes wet. Celeste was openly crying. Hugh reached across to shake my hand, his grip firm and congratulatory. The FBI agents moved toward Dashiell with practiced efficiency. He stood slowly, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours in the courtroom, his face a mask I couldn't read. One agent produced handcuffs. Dashiell Prescott, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda warning continued as they cuffed him. Carlton Bentley sat at the defense table, still flanked by a bailiff, watching his client and co-conspirator being arrested with the blank expression of a man calculating his own prison sentence. The lead agent turned to Virgil. We'll process him in the main lobby. Media's already outside. Good. Let them see him. Let every camera in Portland capture this moment. We followed the procession out of the courtroom. Me, Ruth Celeste, Hugh, and Virgil. The courthouse hallways were lined with people who'd heard about the case. Some I recognized from the community center, others strangers who'd followed the story. They stepped aside as the FBI agents walked Dashiell toward the marble lobby. The lobby was a circus. At least a dozen news cameras, reporters with microphones, curious onlookers. The FBI agents didn't slow down. They walked Dashiell to the center of the space, where the afternoon light poured through the tall windows, making sure every camera got a clear shot. I stepped forward before I could stop myself, moving close enough that only Dashiell could hear me. The whole world will know who you are now, I said quietly. Every single person will know what you did to my daughter. Dashiell's eyes met mine for just a second. I saw rage there, and fear, and something that might have been regret, but was probably just self-pity. Then the agents moved him toward the exit, and I let him go. 62 days? That's how long I'd been fighting. That's how long I'd held everything together without breaking. Mr. Rawlings. I turned. A woman in a county ID badge was approaching, and she was holding Nova's hand. My granddaughter wore a yellow dress with butterflies on it, one Leora had bought her last spring. Her hair was in two braids, a little messy, like whoever had done them that morning had been rushed. She was clutching the stuffed bear I'd given her at Christmas, the one with the worn ear. Her eyes found mine across 30 feet of marble floor. "Grandpa," she pulled free from the social worker's hand and ran. Her shoes made small clicking sounds on the polished stone, her braids bouncing with each step. I dropped to my knees just as she crashed into me, her arms going around my neck with fierce strength. Grandpa, I held her. 62 days since I'd been allowed to touch my granddaughter, and now she was here solid and real and safe in my arms. Her small body shook with sobs. "I want to go home with you," she cried into my shoulder. "I don't want to go back. I want to go home with you." "You are—" I managed my voice breaking. "You are coming home with me, sweetheart. Right now, forever." Her small arms around my neck felt like absolution, like Leora's final gift to me, wrapped in 30 pounds of hope. This was what my daughter had fought for in her last weeks of life. This was what she'd hidden evidence for, recorded testimony for, risked everything for this moment when Nova would be safe. Ruth was beside us, kneeling down. "Hey, Nova, remember me? I'm Ruth. Your grandpa and I are going to take you home today, okay?" Nova lifted her head from my shoulder, her face streaked with tears. "Forever!" "Forever," I promised. Across the lobby, the FBI agents were walking Dashiell toward the exit. The cameras followed, flashes popping, reporters shouting questions. I felt Nova tense in my arms, and I thought she might look at her father one last time. She didn't. She buried her face in my shoulder, her small hands gripping the back of my shirt, choosing her grandfather completely and finally. She didn't watch him go. She didn't call out. She just held on to me like I was the only solid thing in a tilting world. And for the first time in 62 days since the morning I got the call about Leora's crash, I let myself cry. Tears of grief for my daughter, relief for my granddaughter, and something that felt like justice but tasted like ash. Celestine's hand touched my back. Hugh stood nearby, giving us space but staying close. Ruth was crying too, her professional composure finally cracking. Nova's tears soaked into my shirt collar as she whispered, "I love you, Grandpa." Through the courthouse windows, I could see news vans pulling up cameras, ready to capture Dashiell's perp walk. This was justice not just for me, but for Leora, for Nova, for every person Dashiell had destroyed on his way up. We left the courthouse that afternoon through the back entrance, avoiding the cameras. Nova fell asleep in her car seat before we reached my house. Exhausted from crying and clinging and finally feeling safe, I carried her inside and laid her on the guest bed, her bed now, and stood watching her sleep for longer than I should have, just to prove to myself she was real. 7 days after Dashiell's arrest, I sat in Judge Fletcher's courtroom, holding Nova's hand, waiting to hear words that would make us a family in the eyes of the law. The hearing was a formality Ruth had assured me. Emergency custody had already been granted. Dashiell's parental rights had been terminated. The FBI had him in federal detention awaiting trial on murder for hire and money laundering charges. But family court moved according to its own rhythms, and permanent legal guardianship required this final step. Judge Fletcher entered at 10 o'clock sharp, and we all stood. Nova gripped my hand tighter, her small fingers warm against my palm. She wore a blue dress with white flowers, one we'd bought together 3 days ago at Target. Her first shopping trip in 2 months that didn't involve a court-appointed supervisor watching our every move. "Please be seated," Judge Fletcher said. She looked at the thin file on her desk, then at me, then at Nova. "This should be straightforward. Mr. Rawlings, you've already been granted emergency custody, and Mr. Prescott's parental rights have been legally terminated. However, I want to note for the record that Mr. Prescott's attorney attempted to file counter-custody motions from the county jail." My stomach dropped. Ruth stiffened beside me. Those motions were immediately blocked by federal prosecutors as a condition of ongoing plea negotiations. Judge Fletcher continued, her voice taking on an edge of satisfaction. "Mr. Prescott has no legal standing to contest this guardianship now or in the future." Relief flooded through me. Even from jail, Dashiell had tried to reach for Nova one more time and failed. "Mr. Rawlings," Judge Fletcher said, and her voice softened, "I've been on the bench for 19 years. I've seen grandparents fight for their grandchildren before, but I have never seen someone fight with the dedication, the integrity, and the sheer determination you demonstrated in this case. You exposed corruption, solved a murder, and protected this child from a dangerous man. You fought for Nova with everything you had. She paused and I saw her glance at Nova with something like tenderness. You are the best guardian she could possibly have. Full legal guardianship is hereby granted effective immediately. The gavel came down softly this time, not with the sharp crack of justice being served, but with the gentle sound of a family being made whole. Nova tugged on my sleeve. Are we going home now, Grandpa? I looked down at her upturned face, her brown eyes so much like Leora's, and felt something release in my chest that had been clenched tight since July. Yes, sweetheart, I said, my voice thick. We're going home, for good. Ruth squeezed my shoulder as we stood. I signed papers at the clerk's desk, received certified copies of the guardianship order, and walked out of that courthouse for what I hoped would be the last time in a very long while. I looked down at Nova's small hand in mine and realized this was the first moment in 73 days I'd allowed myself to believe we were safe. 4 days later, Ruth called me while Nova was at her first day of pre-K orientation. Malcolm Hartwell wants to meet with you, she said. He's an estate attorney. He says Leora was his client. The name meant nothing to me. Leora never mentioned an estate attorney. That's what he said you'd say. Can you meet him at 2 o'clock? I'll come with you. Malcolm Hartwell's office occupied the top floor of a restored brick building in downtown Portland, the kind of place where old money went to stay old money. He was a silver-haired man in his 60s with kind eyes and a quiet dignity that suggested he'd spent decades keeping important secrets. His handshake was firm, his office lined with leather-bound law books that looked like they'd actually been read. Mr. Rawlings, thank you for coming, he said, gesturing to the chairs across from his mahogany desk. I've been following the news coverage of your custody case. I'm relieved it resolved in your favor. You said you were Leora's attorney. I asked, still confused. I handled her estate after she died. There was no mention of... That's because what I'm about to show you was deliberately hidden from probate, Malcolm said. He opened a file on his desk. Your daughter retained me 8 months before her death. She wanted to establish a trust fund for Nova that would be completely invisible to her husband. He slid a document across the desk. I stared at the numbers, certain I was misreading them. $2.5 million, Malcolm said quietly. Your daughter liquidated stock portfolios she'd inherited from her mother, moved funds through 3 different accounts to obscure the trail, and established an irrevocable trust for Nova's benefit. The trust covers all educational and medical expenses until Nova turns 25. You're named as sole trustee. How did she, when did she... I couldn't form a complete sentence. $2.5 million. Leora had hidden that much money from Dashiell. She was planning to leave him Mr. Rawlings, Malcolm said gently. She came to me in November of last year. She said her husband was dangerous and that she needed to protect Nova's future before she filed for divorce. This trust was her insurance policy. 8 months before her death, Leora had been planning her escape for almost a year. She'd known Dashiell was dangerous. She'd prepared for every contingency except the one that killed her. The envelope with Leora's handwriting sat on the desk between us, like a bridge between the daughter I'd lost and the granddaughter I'd saved. She left you something else, Malcolm said. He pulled a cream-colored envelope from the file, Leora's familiar handwriting across the front. Dad only open when Nova is safe, and you've won. Malcolm slid the envelope across his mahogany desk. My hands shook as I picked it up. After everything, the investigation, the custody battle, the arrest, my daughter had one last thing to tell me. I didn't open the letter in Malcolm's office. I thanked him, tucked the envelope in my jacket pocket, and drove to the elementary school to pick up Nova. Some things needed to be read alone, in the quiet hours after bedtime, when grief could have its space without frightening a 4-year-old. The Oregonian's front page headline hit me like a gut punch. 2 weeks later, tech executive confesses to murder for hire in wife's death. I stood in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, coffee growing cold in my hand, reading words I'd waited months to see. Dashiell had taken a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. Life in federal prison without possibility of parole. In his formal confession, he'd admitted to paying Clyde Mercer $200,000 to cause the crash that killed Leora. $100,000 up front, another $100,000 upon completion. $200,000, 20 times what Virgil had initially reported. The full price of my daughter's murder, laid out in court documents like a business transaction. The article continued. Federal prosecutors were dismantling Dashiell's entire criminal network. following threads that led to shell companies in 4 states and money laundering operations that had moved over $40 million in the past 3 years. 12 associates faced charges. Carlton Bentley had already pleaded guilty and was cooperating with investigators. I folded the newspaper and set it on the counter. Nova was still asleep in her room, our room now decorated with the stuffed animals and books we'd chosen together. Outside, Portland was waking up under a gray October sky. Somewhere in a federal detention center, Dashiell was waking up, two-facing the rest of his life in a cell. I pulled Leora's letter from the drawer, where I'd kept it for 2 weeks, afraid to open it and equally afraid not to. The paper was cream-colored expensive. Her handwriting was steady, written in the blue pen she'd always preferred. I sat at the kitchen table and read my daughter's last words to me. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means you won. It means Nova is safe. It means everything I planned worked even if I didn't survive to see it. I've been documenting Dashiell's crimes for 13 months. Every transaction, every threat, every moment of violence. I knew he'd kill me if he discovered what I was doing. But I also knew that if I died, you'd fight for Nova. You'd never stop. So I built you a weapon evidence he couldn't destroy because he didn't know it existed. My death isn't the end of my plan, Dad. It's the culmination. I chose this. I chose to gather proof instead of running, because running would have meant looking over my shoulder forever. This way, even if he kills me, Nova gets free. Promise me you'll raise her with laughter. Don't let my death steal her childhood. She needs joy more than she needs revenge. I love you. I'm so sorry I couldn't say goodbye. Leora." I folded the letter carefully, tucked it in the envelope, and put it in the box with her photos a map for the future she'd drawn before she died. Hugh stopped by that afternoon while Nova was at a play date with a girl from her pre-K class, the first friend she'd made in 2 months of school. "You've won the legal battle, Harlan," he said, settling into the armchair by the window. "But healing from trauma takes longer than justice. How are you really doing?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Some days I feel like we're going to be okay. Other days I wake up and forget she's gone, and I have to remember all over again." "That's normal," Hugh said quietly. "Grief isn't linear, neither is recovery." By Thanksgiving, Nova and I had settled into something that felt almost like routine. She went to school 5 days a week. We had dinner together every night. On weekends, we visited the park or the library or the children's museum. Slowly, carefully, we were building a life. I took her to the NE Portland shelter for the Thanksgiving meal, the same place I'd served food for 15 years before Dashiell's war began. Celeste was there, setting up tables. Paloma was in the kitchen directing volunteers with the same fierce energy she'd brought to helping me find Saskia. When I walked in holding Nova's hand, the room went quiet. Then Paloma started clapping. The applause spread with volunteers, shelter guests, people I'd known for years, and some I'd never met. They stood, all of them, giving me an ovation I didn't know how to accept. Paloma crossed the room and hugged me hard. "This man saved my life," she said to the crowd, her voice carrying. "And he fought for his granddaughter when the whole system tried to stop him. This is what community means. We protect each other. Let's show him what he means to us." When Paloma started clapping again, I wanted to tell her I wasn't a hero. I was just a father who refused to let his daughter die twice. But Nova was tugging on my hand, smiling up at me with Leora's eyes, and maybe that was enough. The sentencing hearing happened on a cold December morning. Federal Judge Theodore Carmichael, a distinguished black man in his late 60s with silver temples and a reputation for thoughtful sentencing, presided over the federal criminal case with gravity and wisdom that filled the courtroom. I sat in the gallery with Ruth watching as Dashiell was led in, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He'd lost weight. His expensive haircut had grown out. He looked like what he was, a murderer facing justice. Judge Carmichael didn't waste words. "Mr. Prescott, you orchestrated your wife's murder and ran a criminal enterprise that defrauded investors and laundered tens of millions of dollars. You will serve 42 years in federal prison without possibility of parole." Clyde Mercer received 35 years, Carlton Bentley 18. As the courtroom cleared, Judge Carmichael called me to the bench. Up close, his eyes were kind beneath his severity. "You've done the impossible, Mr. Rawlings," he said quietly. "You've won. You exposed corruption, solved a murder, and saved your granddaughter. But now comes the hard part, living with the grief while raising that little girl. That takes a different kind of courage." Judge Carmichael's words echoed in my head as I drove home that December evening. The hard part, living. He was right. I'd spent 6 months fighting for justice. But now, I had to learn something harder: how to be happy again. Learning to be happy turned out to be a daily practice, not a destination. Some mornings I woke up, and Nova's laughter over breakfast felt like enough. Other mornings I found myself staring at Leora's photo on the mantle, wondering if I'd ever stop expecting her to walk through the door. 6 months to the day after I lost my daughter, I stood under the oak tree at Riverview Cemetery with the people who'd helped me save her child. January rain fell soft and steady, the kind that soaked through your coat if you stood still long enough. The oak tree's bare branches offered little shelter, but no one complained. Celeste stood to my left holding an umbrella over Nova. Hugh was on my right, his weathered face somber. Ruth Virgil, and a handful of others from the community center formed a small circle around Leora's headstone. The marker was simple gray granite engraved with her name and dates that looked too close together: Leora Rawlings, Prescott, 1994 to 2023. Below that, the words I'd chosen: beloved daughter, devoted mother, fierce protector. Nova held my hand, her small fingers curled in mine. She wore a purple raincoat and yellow boots, splashing in puddles on the way here, until I'd gently told her we needed to be quiet when we arrived. She'd asked me 3 times this morning where we were going, and 3 times I'd explained that we were visiting Mommy's special place. I'm not sure she understood. At 4 years old, death was still an abstract concept. Mommy was in heaven, or watching over us, or sleeping under the tree. They all phrases that sounded comforting, but meant nothing concrete to a child who just wanted her mother to come home. Thank you all for being here, I said, my voice rough. 6 months ago, I thought I'd lost everything. But Leora knew something I didn't. She knew I wouldn't be alone. She knew the people she'd grown up with, the community we'd built together, would carry me through. I pulled the letter from my jacket pocket, protected in a plastic sleeve against the rain. I'd read it a dozen times since Malcolm gave it to me. But there was a section I'd saved for today, words Leora had written for this exact moment. She left me a letter, I continued, and she wanted me to share part of it with you. The rain seemed to quiet as I unfolded the pages. Dad, I chose the oak tree at Riverview because I remember you taking me there when I was 7 after Mom died. You sat with me under that tree for hours while I cried and asked questions you couldn't answer. You told me that Mom would always be part of me, that love doesn't end when someone dies. I need you to do that for Nova now. Sit with her under that tree. Tell her about me. Tell her I loved her more than my own life, because I did. And she needs to know that sacrifice came from love, not obligation. My throat closed. I hadn't known Leora remembered that day. She'd been so young, and I'd felt so helpless sitting under this same oak tree, holding my grieving daughter and wondering if I was saying the right things. Now, here I was again 3 decades later, holding her daughter and trying to find words that would make sense of loss. The rain felt like forgiveness washing away 6 months of rage and replacing it with something quieter, acceptance maybe, or the beginning of it. I knew you wouldn't do this alone, I continued reading. I knew the community you built would save you when I couldn't. Ruth, Celeste, Hugh, Virgil, all the people who showed up when it mattered. Now, I need you to do the hardest thing, love Nova, like you love me. Not with fear of losing her, but with the joy of having her. She's going to ask about me. Tell her I was brave. Tell her I fought. Tell her that everything I did so she could be free. I folded the letter and looked at the faces around me, Ruth wiping her eyes, Celeste gripping Hugh's arm, Virgil standing with his head bowed. These were the people who'd answered 3 a.m. Phone calls who'd searched through accident reports, who'd testified in court and held me together when I was breaking. They'd saved me just like Leora said they would. Nova tugged on my coat sleeve. Grandpa, why are you crying? Is Mommy making you sad? I knelt down on the wet grass, not caring about my pants getting muddy, and looked into her brown eyes. Leora's eyes passed down through jeans and stubbornness and fierce love. No, sweetheart, I said softly. She's making me grateful. And tonight before you sleep, I'm going to tell you a story about the bravest person I ever knew. Is it about Mommy? Nova asked. Every word, I promised. How do you tell a 4-year-old that her mother died saving her future, that justice came at the cost of a life we'd never get back? You don't, not all at once. You tell her in pieces, in stories gentle enough for small ears and true enough to honor the sacrifice. You tell her over years, building memory brick by brick, until she's old enough to understand what her mother gave. We stood under the oak tree for another 10 minutes, silent except for the rain and the occasional rustle of wind through bare branches. Then Celeste suggested we all go get hot chocolate, and Nova's face lit up with the kind of pure joy only children can manage in the middle of grief. As we walked back to the cars, I looked over my shoulder at the oak tree one more time. Leora had chosen this spot, knowing I'd return here, knowing Nova would grow up visiting this tree and hearing stories about her mother's courage. It wasn't about preserving a grave, it was about planting roots for the future. I realized then that my nightly promise to tell Nova about Leora wasn't just about preserving memory. It was about teaching her what my wife had taught me when she died. What I'd tried to teach Leora under this same tree 3 decades ago, that love survives death. That the people we lose remain part of us shaping who we become long after they're gone. That night I tucked Nova into bed and began the story I'd tell every night for years to come. Your mother was brave and smart, and she loved you more than anything in the world, I said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead, the way Leora used to. Nova's eyes were already closing, but she smiled. Tell me tomorrow too, Grandpa. I would. I kept that promise. Every night for months, I told Nova about her mother, about Leora's favorite books, her terrible singing voice, the way she'd laugh until she snorted. Small stories, true stories. Building a portrait Nova would never remember on her own. 18 months after my daughter died, I woke to Nova singing in the kitchen off-key, loud and completely unafraid. Sunlight poured through the windows of our 2-bedroom apartment in Northeast Portland. Nova stood on her step stool, pouring cereal with intense concentration, wearing mismatched socks and her favorite dinosaur shirt. Her hair needed brushing, but she was humming a preschool song completely absorbed. Morning, sweetheart, I said, shuffling toward the coffee maker. Morning, Grandpa, I made my own breakfast. Miss Brennan says I'm very independent. Miss Brennan, Nova's cheerful preschool teacher with endless patience and a gift for helping traumatized children rediscover joy, had become another pillar in our support network. She'd called 2 weeks into the school year to say Nova was thriving, making friends showing no signs of the fear that had clung to her those first months. You are very independent, I agreed. What else did Miss Brennan say? And she says puppies make families happy. Can we get a puppy, Grandpa? I laughed. A year ago, I would have said no automatically, but Judge Carmichael's words still echoed. The hard part is living. Learning to say yes to joy instead of no. To risk. Maybe we'll talk about it. A door slammed somewhere in the building. Nova didn't flinch, didn't tense, didn't even look up from her cereal. 18 months ago, any loud noise would have made her freeze, shoulders hunched, eyes wide. The trauma Dashiell had inflicted ran deep, flinching at raised voices, crying when doors closed too hard, nightmares about crashes in courtrooms. But steady love, consistent safety, and time had done what justice alone couldn't. The fear had faded. Now she was just a kid eating cereal, oblivious to the miracle of her own healing. I poured coffee and watched her tie her own shoes, small victories that felt like miracles when I remembered the terrified child who'd clung to me 18 months ago. Celeste stopped by that afternoon during Nova's playdate. She checked my blood pressure, a routine she'd insisted on continuing. Your heart's doing great, Harlan, she said. And more importantly, so are you. You've built something beautiful here. I looked around the apartment. Nova's backpack by the door, our calendar covered in her crayon, marks the small altar in the corner with Leora's photo. She laughs now, I said quietly. Really laughs. Leora would be so proud. Though Leora is proud, Celeste said firmly. I still volunteered at the shelter twice a week. Virgil and I went fishing most Saturdays. He'd taught Nova to bait a hook last month. Ruth met me for coffee every Tuesday. Dashiell had tried to appeal his sentence. It had been denied. We'd built a community, Nova and I, not to replace what we'd lost, but to honor it. December arrived with rare snow. Nova pressed her face to the window, watching flakes fall, then begged to go outside. We built a lopsided snowman in the courtyard, and she laughed so hard she fell backward into a drift. That evening, she drew a picture stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. She wrote her name in careful crooked letters, Nova. This is for Mommy, she announced, walking to the corner, where we kept Leora's photo on a small shelf alongside the framed letter. Nova placed the drawing carefully beside them. That's beautiful, sweetheart. She stared at Leora's photo, then looked up at me with serious brown eyes. Grandpa, can she hear me when I talk to her picture? I knelt beside her, my knees creaking, and put my arm around her shoulders. Yes, I said. And you know what? She prepared everything for us before she left. The money for your school, the people who helped us even this moment, right here. She loved you so much that she made sure you'd be safe, even when she couldn't be here. Nova tilted her head. Like a treasure map. Exactly like a treasure map. She left us clues to find our way. Leora's love was like the oak tree at her grave roots, deep in the ground branches, reaching forward into seasons she'd never see. It grew in the trust fund that would pay for Nova's college, in the evidence that had put Dashiell away, in the letter that had guided me through the darkest months, in the community she'd known would save us both. The strongest love doesn't announce itself. It works quietly in sealed envelopes and secret bank accounts, in recorded testimonies and midnight plans. It prepares everything, even when it knows it won't be there to see it through. And sitting there beside Nova, I realized I was doing the same thing. Every night I told her about Leora. I was building Nova's foundation for the future, giving her roots in a past she couldn't remember, and wings for a future I might not see, just as Leora had built mine. Love that prepares, love that plans, love that survives death because it plants seeds for tomorrow. I tucked Nova into bed that December night and told her the story one more time. Your mother loved you so much that she made sure you'd be safe even when she couldn't be here, I said, pulling the blankets up. She thought of everything. Nova smiled sleepily, her stuffed bear tucked under one arm. Like how you love me, Grandpa. My throat tightened. Exactly like that, sweetheart. Her eyes drifted closed, and within minutes her breathing slowed into sleep. I stood in the doorway watching her, this miracle child, this gift my daughter had fought and died to protect. The strongest love prepares everything, quietly, completely even, from beyond. Leora had prepared me to save Nova, and now every day I was preparing Nova to thrive without me when that time came. It was the most sacred work I'd ever done.